Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
This place probably needs a security guard or something. Seems like someone keeps sneaking around the cafe at night, smearing mud on the windows. Weird thing is, there hasn't been rain around these parts for weeks. I don't know where he's getting all this mud from. Hang on a second. What was that, Jeff? It's not mud. Oh, God. Well, while I go and call a security agency about this, enjoy this compilation of scary security guard stories. Most of these stories were featured on Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host that if you don't know about, you should look up right now on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and follow and rate it. These are tales from the break room. Geez, people, this isn't a high school bathroom. A Dire Confession from C-Note 78. I work as a transit security officer in Vancouver, British Columbia. My job entails dealing with problems on the bus. If someone is drunk and causing a problem, or if someone is passed out and not waking up. We also rode the buses to check to make sure people pay their fares and are not cheating the system. Anyway, on this particular night, which was a graveyard shift as we work from 7:30 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., I had ridden in one of our late-night buses from downtown to the suburbs of Surrey, which was about a 90-minute bus ride. We got through the night without any hitches. My partner and I were in the patrol car, heading back to the office to finish off our paperwork for the night, then clock out. My partner was driving, and I was the passenger. It was about 4:45 a.m. then, and it was in the fall, so it was still dark out. That's when I see this guy standing on the side of the road, just staring at the cars passing by. As our car is about to pass by, I make eye contact with him. I still remember those beady little eyes of his. His eyes looked left and right and back and forth when all of a sudden he runs out into traffic. Luckily, my partner sees him and swerves to avoid running him over. I tell him to pull over the car. Then we run over to where the guy was standing as he's walking back to the curb. I'm upset at this guy, obviously, as we almost hit him with the car. I began to yell at him, asking him what the heck his problem is. I wanted to know if he knew how close he was to getting killed. It was at this point I got a good look of his eyes, and I can see that the guy's not all there. I changed my approach and asked him what was going on. Maybe we could help him if he tells us what's happening. I'm thinking this guy is on some heavy drugs or has a mental illness of some kind, or both. The man then looks at me and my partner and says, "I need to talk to a justice of the peace. I need to confess." My partner and I look at each other, both with confirming looks that this guy is crazy, and maybe we should call the cops. I ask him, "What's going on, buddy? What do you want to confess?" The guy refuses to talk to anyone except for a justice of the peace or judge, and again says he needs to confess. My partner starts to call it in to dispatch, as I try to get some more details and a name, a date of birth, address, etc. As I'm trying to get more information from him, another wave of cars begins to approach. They would be passing by momentarily. The guy just keeps repeating, "I need to confess. I need to confess." Then he takes another shot at running in front of the passing cars. The fight was on, and lucky for us, the guy wasn't very large in stature. Maybe 5'5" and 140 to 150 pounds. I was well over his size, and I had a partner for backup, who was fit and an active athlete. So the guy was easily subdued, and since we felt he was at risk of harming himself or someone else, we decided to handcuff and arrest him for safety until the police arrived. Try as I might, I wanted to get him to tell me what he wanted to confess, but he kept wanting to talk only to the justice of the peace. The police showed up shortly afterward and took the male into custody. This happened in 2016, and it still bothers me to this day. What did he want to confess? Maybe there was a house with a dead body somewhere, or maybe he was just out of his mind. We'll never know, I guess. The Shadow Man, from Jack Mustard. In the spring of 2011, when I began working as a security guard at a major tech company, one of the other officers made a remark to me before he left the building. "Don't let any odd sounds get to you," he said. I told him most sites have unusual noises and they don't really bother me. I'm unlikely to encounter anything of a supernatural nature here, I said. "Oh, I don't know about that," he replied. Being constructed in 2001 with its data center and telecoms, the tech company's site had the look and feel of something off a Star Wars set. It was a new high-tech structure with no history and no known tragedy. Besides me, the only energy there was computer energy. For nearly the first 3 years of my job, my initial assessment was proven correct. But there was one night in 2012, when I was reading a blog, I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye of a pitch-black figure flashing across the second floor. Near the security desk is a large circular opening where one can see the walkway on the second floor. It looked like a robber dressed in black with a face mask, except it moved fast. It moved faster than any human could move. I brushed it off as nothing to be concerned about and continued to read my blog. I never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot about it. I didn't see it head on, so it didn't really exist to me. It was a figment of my late-night imagination. Fast forward about 1 year, on the 3 a.m. patrol, I had an encounter far more real and chilling than the previous one. During the hourly patrols, the 4 telecom rooms and the data center have to be checked to ensure the computers do not overheat. To reach one of the telecom rooms, one has to traverse a dark corridor, which opens into a dimly lit office area. As I came out of the corridor, in my peripheral vision to my right, I saw a black, translucent figure. The figure stood approximately 6 feet tall. One could discern a head, neck, torso, and limbs, and it appeared to have short dreadlocks. I turned to look at it, and actually saw it straight on for about 2 seconds. It was black, faceless, but definitely real. I jumped backward and let out what seemed to be a loud yell. No one could hear me. The shadowy figure stepped back and blended itself into the background. The atmosphere lightened and returned to normal. Needless to say, the main lights went on and stayed on early that morning. When the security supervisor relieved me that morning, I asked him if any tragedies had occurred in the building or near the site. I considered him a reliable source to ask, as he had worked at the tech company since its opening. He said that no one had died on site, and he didn't remember anyone with short dreadlocks ever working there. Could something have happened prior to the construction of the building? Further research into the history of the place turned up nothing. To this day, I'm still uncertain as to who or what the mysterious Shadow Man or Shadow Men were. The Night of the Creeps, from 19 Delta Scout. College is a time of great paradox. You spend a good portion of your day in class, and if you want to pass your classes, you need to spend a good portion of your night studying. Oh, and if you do need money, you'll also need to find a job. And heaven forbid that girl who took you home from the party now thinks you two are a couple. It was a constant juggling act trying to balance school, study, work, girls, and sleep, because devoting too much time for one took away from the others. My parents weren't rich, so I didn't want to ask them for money, and I wasn't ready yet to join the military and let Uncle Sam pay for my college tuition. So I had to get a job. I thought I'd found the perfect job, one which paid me fairly decently while allowing me to study and do homework at the same time. Yep, I became a security guard. It wasn't a bad gig. The site I was assigned to was an office building, which was located across the street to an FBI branch office in a low-crime area of the city. I got there at 4 in the evening and escorted office workers to their cars until the building closed at 5. After 5, I would do a few security patrols around the building, letting the cleaning crew into the building at 8 in the evening and letting them out at midnight when my shift ended. In between that time, I was free to study and do homework from my desk inside the security office. I was basically on my own, and for 6 months at the site, I only saw my security supervisor 4 times. Like I said, it was a sweet gig. Then one Friday before my shift was to start, I got a call from the security supervisor asking me if I wouldn't mind working the graveyard shift for a few weeks out at a site located in what was known as the Great Dismal Swamp. The hours were from 11 at night to 6 in the morning, and because the site was so remote, the job would pay an additional $3 an hour. I quickly agreed. I could use that extra cash. Since I got off at 6 in the morning and my first class started at 9, I had plenty of time to get ready for school. I met my security supervisor at the main office at 11 that night, and once again I was not impressed by him, which is why I was happy that I rarely saw him. He was middle-aged with a beer gut, absolutely no muscle mass on him whatsoever. His hair was, in my opinion, too long and scraggly to inspire confidence in someone who was supposed to be a security guard. And he had a bushy, naughty movie stash, if you know what I'm saying. His hairy arms had really tacky-looking tattoos, which he said he got while he was in the Navy, but they looked like tattoos that you'd get while serving time in prison. In fact, if it wasn't for the security badge and uniform that he wore, which was disheveled and unironed, his picture looked like it should have adorned the walls of the post office. When I met him, he was visibly drunk, and he smelled of alcohol. He told me to follow him, and he got into his old brown and primer gray Dodge Al Bundy-looking mobile that had magnetic signs on the rust-colored doors that read, A1 Security Services. I got into my brand new Chevy Camaro, which I paid for during my senior year in high school, from money I saved working part-time jobs since I was 15. I then followed him as he screeched out of the parking lot and onto the highway. It was a Friday night, and this being a huge military town, it was military payday, so the highway was packed, but traffic was moving quickly as we took the exit towards the city of Chesapeake, which was built on the Great Dismal Swamp. We were on the road for a good 45 minutes, going deeper and deeper into farm country, passing several rivers and streams. The traffic had all but vanished long ago, and the streetlights were few and far between. Still, we hadn't reached the site. I was seriously thinking that this guy was bringing me out here to kill me, dump my body into the swamp. A suspicion that got stronger when he turned off the main 2-lane road and onto a gravel road, which wound between the viney trees and weeping willows. The narrow road ended at a dilapidated parking lot, at the end of which stood what appeared to be an abandoned 2-story building. Behind the run-down-looking building was a canal, which connected to the Elizabeth River. One tilted light pole holding 2 light bulbs, which flickered on and off, illuminated the parking lot, and aside from the old building with vines crawling up its sides, there was nothing else in the area, except dark, foreboding trees, swamp, and probably the ghosts of past security guards, which this guy took out here to kill. To my surprise, however, the creepy old abandoned building was well lit from the inside. "Come on, kid," said my security supervisor. "Let's get you inside. It's not good to stay outside here for long." "Huh?" I said.
Nothing,"
he answered. As we continued walking, I saw several other run-down structures next to the building, though these were not illuminated and hung in the shadows. As we got closer to the building, I saw it had been vandalized, with several windows broken out and spray-painted graffiti on the walls. There was also a slightly foul smell in the air, like wet, rotting vegetation mixed with sweaty gym socks that were left inside your gym bag in the trunk of your car for a week. "This used to be an old paper mill a few years back," said my security manager as he opened the door into the brightly lit main lobby. The door hadn't been locked. "The mill went out of business and just sat here until it was bought by a Dutch company that wants to start it back up sometime next year. Till then, they want us to keep watch over the facility to discourage vandals and such." We walked down the main corridor, which was littered with broken glass, leaves, and more graffiti, past a broken set of double doors and towards a room at the end of the hallway. "Doesn't look like there's been any vandals here for a while," I observed as our footsteps echoed across the tomb-like building. "Probably not," my supervisor replied. We got to the room at the end of the corridor, which ended up looking like an old boiler room, with rusty pipes and gauges and whatnot. A large table stretched across the wall where windows looked out across the canal outside. 3 old black padded chairs were at the table. "Well, here we are," said my supervisor. "Be careful when you do your roving patrols, as there may be some raccoons or other animals which have made this building their home. And watch out when you walk around outside for snakes and whatnot. Did you bring a flashlight?" No, I replied. I wasn't told that I needed one. Okay, he said. "Well, let me get out of here. If you run into trouble, just call 911, then call the night shift supervisor. Keep the lights on and I'll see you in the morning." Wait, I said. "This seems like a pretty nice site. Peaceful, nobody to bug you, and you get paid extra? What's the catch?" My supervisor looked annoyed. "No catch," he said, leaving. "Just can't get anyone to stay on the site. Roy, the new guy, quit this morning after his shift here ended." "Really?" I asked. But before I could say anything else, my supervisor added, "Oh, one more thing. Ned's running late, but he'll be here with you later. Remember, keep the lights on." He walked out before I could say anything else, and I can't say I was sorry to see him go. I looked around the boiler room and saw that there was a coffee pot and an old dirty microwave at the end of the table that I guess the previous security guards had been using. There was also an old touch-tone phone that I assume I could call the police with if Jason Voorhees decided to rise out of the swamp and hack me to death. I figured I'd wait for a little bit and get settled in before going back out to my Camaro to get my schoolwork. If I finished my assignment tonight, I'd be free for the rest of the weekend to use my Camaro for what it was intended for, to be a chick magnet. I sat on one of the rusty old black padded chairs and nearly fell over backwards as the back support was broken and gave out. The creaking noise seemed to echo down the hallway. I rolled it aside and tested another chair, finding that that one was fairly stable. I sat down and scanned the table some more. I found the security duty log from the night before that was on a clipboard. The report from the new guy, Roy, was still on it, which meant that he never returned to the main office to turn it in. Apparently, he just hauled tail out of there this morning. Roy's printing was neat and tidy, all in block letters and easy to read. I wondered why he would just leave the log here when he knew he should have turned it in. That's how a guard gets paid. With nothing else to do, I read the log entries. Midnight, arrived on site. Security supervisor instructs me to ensure that the lights remain on in the building. Advised to call 911 if there's trouble. 0030 hours. Conduct security patrol around inside of building. Several lights flickering on and off in upstairs corridors. 0100. Lights in parking lot flickered on and off. Thought I saw movement outside. Went to investigate but found nothing. 0215. Lights in the security room have gone out. Lights in main hallway downstairs flickering on and off. Going to look for breaker box. 0230. Cannot find breaker box, but I thought I saw someone outside looking through a window in the security room. Going to investigate. 0250. There's definitely someone outside. Called to the person, but when I got around to where he was standing, he was gone. The last entry was sometime after that. I'm not sure what time it was exactly because Roy didn't write it down. However, Roy's handwriting was no longer neat and uniform, but shaky, almost as if he panicked. It simply said, "All lights completely out. That's not a person looking into the window. I'm out of here." I tossed the clipboard back onto the table. So what, I thought. Did a badger scare you away? The lights in the room flickered for a second but came back on. I thought I saw something at the window out of the corner of my eye, but I dismissed it as a trick of the flickering lights. I leaned back in my chair, wondering when the other guard was supposed to be here. I usually worked by myself. I didn't know too many other guards. I'd heard the name Ned before, but usually as Old Bloody Ned. I wondered if that was the same guy. I decided it was a good time to do a patrol around the building, to get a feel for the place. I use the term patrol loosely, as it sounded more professional than having fun exploring a creepy old abandoned paper mill. As it turned out, as far as abandoned office buildings go, it was pretty unremarkable. Downstairs had a cafeteria and break room with long aluminum tables and empty snack and soda machines. There was a front office and a conference room with empty desks and filing cabinets filled with old invoices, shipping and receiving documents, and pay stubs. By the way, if you used to work for an old paper mill in Chesapeake that went out of business, you might want to know that they still have old pay documents that have your bank account info still on them inside old filing cabinets. Anyway, the upstairs had 2 halls lined with offices and a storeroom, which had cleaning supplies and a set of metal stairs, which led to the roof and the air conditioners. Dust and cobwebs covered the corners and walls, as well as shattered glass that hadn't been disturbed for ages. And aside from the lights flickering on and off occasionally, there really wasn't anything particularly spooky about the place. I then decided to go back out to my car to grab my school backpack and the dinner that I'd packed. 2 double-decker smoked ham and bologna sandwiches, with Swiss cheese and the right amount of spicy mustard and mayonnaise with a tall can of Pringles chips, and a couple of ice-cold Red Bulls. This was going to be yummy, as I'd only eaten lunch about 12 hours earlier. I was famished. I returned to the boiler room, tossed my backpack to the side, and laid out my dinner, anxious to sink my teeth into those delicious sandwiches. I first wrote a quick entry into the security log. 0130. Completed security patrol around building. Lights flickering occasionally, but otherwise all secure. Just as I turned to grab a sandwich, all the lights in the building went out. I sat there in pitch blackness for about 2 seconds, annoyed that I'd have to look for the breaker box when the lights flickered and came on dimly. The lights were flickering when I heard a shuffling noise coming from the main hallway. Slowly, I got up, easing the seat back quietly in order to hear better. Yeah, there definitely was something shambling down the hallway towards me. By then, the lights had come on completely again, as I approached the door to the boiler room and opened it. I was quickly confronted by a terrifying apparition. He was tall and skinny with a pot belly, pale, white, and old with long wisps of white hair dangling down from his wrinkled, liver-spotted bald head. His nose and ears were large and broken teeth lined his open mouth. The apparition stared at me through crazy-looking eyes. "You must be Ned," I said, reading the name on his dirty uniform. His uniform looked worse than my supervisor's, and Ned smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. "That's me, boy," said Ned, pushing past me and walking towards the table. "Old Bloody Ned, they call me. Sorry I'm late. My son had to go pick me up after the bar closed so that I could get here." Ned slumped down on the seat I had been sitting in. He'd obviously worked this site before. "Yeah, they sent me here to keep you company, boy. It appears all you young folks are too afraid to be out here in the swamps by yourselves. Oh, sandwiches." Ned picked up one of my delicious double-decker smoked ham and bologna sandwiches with Swiss cheese and just the right amount of spicy mustard and mayonnaise, and began chomping down on it. "Hey, that's my din—"
"Do you know why this place chases off so many people?"
said Ned, ignoring me. "Because of you?" I said, slumping down on the broken chair.
"Don't mess with me, boy,"
retorted Ned, chunks of bread flying out of his mouth as he spoke. "I swear kids today have no class. No, boy. Take a look out the window. Across the canal. You see all them trees out there?" Nope. I see the reflection of some old guy eating my dinner in the window and a whole lot of black night." "Dang it, boy. Well, if you could see out there, back behind them trees is an Indian graveyard. Back before the white man came, this land used to belong to the Chesapeake Indians. That's me, boy. I'm part Chesapeake Indian." "Okay. Assuming that you're telling me the truth, the canal is pretty wide, and the trees are far across the bank. That would put the graveyard pretty far from here." "They moved the markers, but they left the bodies here, boy. Here, right where they built this paper mill. They say it went bankrupt because they angered the spirits of my ancestors." I rolled my eyes at this drunken old creep. "Like in that movie?" What movie?" he said, now opening my can of Pringles. "That movie where they moved the headstones but left the bodies, and that little girl got sucked into the TV. And then a stuffed clown tried to drag that little boy under the bed." Ned looked at me questioningly. "Are you on drugs, boy?" Exasperated, I grabbed my other sandwich and my Red Bulls, then rolled the chair to the far end of the table where I'd thrown my backpack. At least I could get some schoolwork done. I took out one of my extremely overpriced textbooks and turned my back on Ned. I tried to get in the zone to do some homework. "You afraid of blood, boy?" said Ned. "Because I can't stand boys who are afraid of blood. I always say you don't deserve to call yourself a man if you're afraid of blood. Heck, you may not deserve to live if you're afraid of blood." I slowly turned, now determined to keep an eye on this insane old man. No, I don't really spend too much time obsessing about blood, Ned." "That's the problem with you young kids these days. All weak and pathetic. I was in Vietnam, boy. We rolled around in blood and guts every day. Blood, boy. Buckets and buckets of blood." "My father did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He was with the Marines, and he never talked about rolling around in buckets of blood." "Bah," Ned exclaimed, waving his hands dismissively. "Blood isn't death. Blood is life. I hunt, you know, mostly deer, and every time I hunt I take the blood of my kills and I put it in a metal tub. Then I get all naked and climb into the tub. I absorb the life of my kills in that tub, and I take the spirit of the deer by drinking its blood." "Well, I'm not hungry, ever again," I said, pushing my sandwich towards Bloody Ned. "When my kid got old enough, I taught him how to hunt too. When he got his first deer kill, we drained the blood into a bucket, and I made my son pour the blood over his head. Blood, baby. Blood." With all Ned's talk of blood and guts, I could feel myself getting nauseous. "You look kinda white there, boy. You ain't afraid of a little blood, are you?" "No," I said, getting up on wobbly feet. "I'm going on a patrol. Get some fresh air." "Don't let them ghosts get you, boy," cackled Ned as I left the room. Sweating with spots appearing in my eyesight, I staggered down the hallway and stepped outside, feeling instantly better. Where in the world did they dig up that vampire? I walked to the parking lot under the flickering light pole and took deep breaths until the horrific images that Ned implanted in my head faded away. It was deathly still, with the calming sounds of water rippling down the canal, mingled with the songs of frogs and crickets. Suddenly, the streetlight went out, and all sound seemed to cease. Even the lights coming from the building seemed to flicker and dim. Without a flashlight, there was no point in being outside any longer. Reluctantly, I began walking back to the building, back to where Ned was at. I decided that if he was still crazy when I got there, I would move to the cafeteria area and spend the rest of the shift there. As I walked toward the building, across the dark parking lot, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. That made me not like Ned all the more with his stories of Indian ghosts and burial grounds. The lights were still flickering as I walked down the main corridor to the boiler room. The flickering lights would make it hard to do homework, but fortunately, they usually didn't flicker for very long. By the time I made it to the boiler room, the lights were back on. Ned was still in his seat, facing outside toward the window. "I'm back, Ned," I said, but he didn't move. Ned?" I stood in front of him looking down. Ned was slumped down in the chair, eyes closed and completely still. "Ned," I said again, looking to see if his chest was rising and falling, and it wasn't. "Ned!" I leaned forward, attempting to put my hand on his chest to feel for a heartbeat. "Blood." Ned cackled as he smacked his lips, dreaming, getting comfortable in his drunken stupor. "Blood." He said again as he began snoring. God dang it, Ned. Then the lights went out completely. I stood in darkness for a second, noticing that the temperature had dropped. The hair on the back of my neck raised as I slowly turned around, feeling that eerie feeling again, that I was being watched. Outside the window, hands pressed against the glass. There was what appeared to be a very, very white little boy, staring at me. Though he was ghostly white, he appeared to be Latino or Native American. Short hair looking like it was cut in a bowl cut fashion, framed two abnormally large eyes, colored pitch black, and his mouth was wide open as if in a silent scream. As I stood there, too shocked and terrified to move, the most ridiculous thought came into my mind. You aren't nearly as creepy as old bloody Ned behind me. Though I couldn't see his eyes, I knew that the little boy was staring right through me. Slowly, he began to fade away, as if being called back, or being swallowed by the darkness until he disappeared. Soon, even his little handprints on the window were gone. When the boy faded away, the lights immediately came on. Strangely, even though I was terrified, I didn't sense anything malicious coming from the apparition. I took my backpack to the abandoned cafeteria in order to do my schoolwork, thinking that if the little boy had a problem with us, he could come back and get old bloody Ned first. In fact, I thought, please get old bloody Ned. I was working on my assignment for so long that I didn't realize it was almost time for shift change. To my surprise, my security supervisor came into the building at around 15 minutes before then. Old bloody Ned was asleep the whole time until shift change, when he finally woke up. My security supervisor shambled down the corridor, smelling of alcohol. His eyes were bloodshot and he was obviously hungover. Old bloody Ned awoke and stumbled over to him. "Hey, son," old bloody Ned said. "Son?" "Hey, Pa," my supervisor said. "I brought the car for you, Dad." I thought, that figures. Old bloody Ned is my insane supervisor's dad. "How'd your shift go?" my supervisor asked. Ned pointed at me.
"This little boy spent the night shaking in his pants, son. Heck, I couldn't keep him awake through his shift. He's a freaking coward.
My supervisor looked at me with disdain.
Boy, you're a pathetic sack of lazy crap, ain't ya?
Not really, I said. Old Bloody Ned got into the old rusty Dodge and drove away, saying,
I'll be back to pick you up at 1 o'clock.
As Ned drove away, I turned to my supervisor. Hey man, I have a suggestion. My supervisor rolled his eyes.
What do you want, you cowardly little college boy?
I let his remark slide off me as I said, Look, this is a pretty easy site. During the graveyard shift, there doesn't need to be 2 people here. When I come back tonight, Ned shouldn't be here.
The Rat, submitted by Solely Americas. Around 1980, I had just gotten out of active duty service with the US Air Force, and I decided to stay at my father's house in Massachusetts until I could find a place of my own. It wasn't easy trying to find a job, but soon I landed a security guard position with a big security company. This company had a contract to provide service for a big electronics manufacturer about 20 miles from my father's place. I had left the military with an honorable discharge and an old beat-up Chevy Nova and little else to my name, so I really needed the job. I drove my old car to the electronics company, where they gave me a baggy uniform and a big flashlight. My shift was to be from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning. I was given a tour of the buildings by the administration supervisor, which took nearly 2 hours. Let me tell you a bit about these buildings I was supposed to wander through all night. The place was a turn-of-the-century, massive 3-story brick mill that was originally built to manufacture textiles. It also had a huge basement and another smaller warehouse-like building across the street. The main building easily took up a city block and was one of the biggest structures in the small city. The interior had been renovated to accommodate offices, laboratories, manufacturing space, and other work areas. It was pretty much a maze in there, and the place stunk of chemicals for electroplating electronic components. It wasn't my idea of the best job in the world, but it was a start. I felt that if I put up with it in the meantime, then I might be able to move up in the company itself. That way I'd be all set. The building across the street was used by the electronics manufacturer to store things like packaging materials, old furniture, and other assorted junk. There were 2 ways to get into that building: either go outside and cross the busy street, or go through an old tunnel underground that ran under the street. It was part of the guards' rounds to inspect the big building and the building across the road several times every night. I've always been a night person anyway, and have always sought jobs where I could work alone. I hate having a boss hovering over my shoulder every minute, and I hate coworkers complaining and gossiping all around me. So checking through the dimly lit buildings was no problem for me, and it wasn't really scary for me. The worst was just having to call the cops a couple of times, because kids either tried to sneak into the ground floor, breaking bottles outside the front door, or they would do graffiti on the outside walls. Nothing really major or extraordinary. Not yet, anyway. What always bothered me, though, was that dang building across the street. It was a ragged-looking building. It looked to be even older than the main building. It had filled stone walls with big steel double doors in front, and no windows. One of the steel doors had a smaller door in the middle, and that's where we usually went to do our checks. When you opened the door, you had to go down about 8 stone steps to get to the warehouse floor. The filled stone walls were crumbling, and in some places, you could actually see through the cracks between the stones. I'd been told that sometimes drunks or homeless people had managed to get in there, either by breaking the small door or because someone had forgotten to lock it. I was warned to keep an eye out for these people, and if I saw any, to just get away from them, then call the cops if I found them in there. Part of my responsibility was not only to protect things, but to keep myself safe as well. Now, usually I prefer to cross the street to get to the other building, but one night it was snowing heavily and the wind was wailing like crazy, so I decided to use the tunnel underground. The tunnel was about 5 feet wide and easily 7 feet high. It was made of cobblestones that were always wet, and the place was colder than a freaking refrigerator. The tunnel was just a straight line across the street, but underneath, and there were small dead-end passages off to the left that only went about 10 feet before they stopped. I have no idea if that was all that was left of some other tunnel that connected to it, or if that dead end had some other purpose. Anyway, I started through the tunnel, which had no lights, so I was carrying my big flashlight and it was blazing a path through the tunnel. I was on my way to check the warehouse. I got about halfway down the 40-foot tunnel when a noise made me stop and listen. It was the sound of a scrabbling noise that stopped me in my tracks. I'd always suspected there might be rats down in the mill's basement and the tunnel, but I hadn't seen any in the 2 months I'd been working here. I slowly began to move my flashlight back and forth to each side of the tunnel, keeping an eye out for anything that might be moving. It didn't take long to see eyes being reflected back at me. Eyes that were a mix of green and yellow in the light, and behind them was a large and dark silhouette. And then I saw it move, and I knew right away what it was. It was a rat bigger than any rat I've ever seen, even in the movies. This thing was as big as a large dog. No joke. It looked like it weighed 400 pounds easy. It had very dark gray skin, with some white under its chin, and its eyes were huge too. In proportion, they were far bigger than they should have been. I kept my light on it as it began to step into the middle of the tunnel, still staring directly at me. Now, I'm 5'8", and I was raised near a swamp. I've seen my fair share of rats, but this was a completely different beast, and I mean that literally. In seconds' time, I decided that my security guard paycheck did not cover confrontations with monsters, so I took a step back from this abomination, never taking my eyes off of the thing or my light. If that thing wanted the tunnel to itself, it could have it. Then, the way a curious smaller rat would, this creature suddenly stood up on its hind legs, bringing its height to about my chest area, and showed me a mouthful of seriously needle-sharp teeth. Then it made this disturbingly ear-grating, high-pitched hissing sound. I had no doubt it was a "you shall not pass" threat, and I took it very much to my pounding heart. I wasn't going to come any closer. Slowly, I was backing up, never letting the creature out of my sight, until my back touched the tunnel door into the main building. And in one quick motion, I was out of there. Luckily, that evil thing just stood there the whole time, watching me retreat. The only mention I made of this confrontation was to the afternoon guard I relieved when I came on the next night. I was curious and a bit disturbed, so I just asked him if he had ever seen any rats in the tunnel. He said he didn't like going through the tunnel, so he never used it. Then he made a joke about being afraid of rats, and I just shrugged it off. So I decided I would avoid using that tunnel as well. I didn't want to risk running into that thing again. Only a few days later, this same guard was doing his last round, around 11 p.m. He went across the street to check the warehouse. He discovered that the small door that we used for entry was broken open, but being the brave fellow he was, he decided to go in anyway to check it out. He told me that he went down the stairs and took a few steps across the floor. He saw what he thought looked like a man lying on his side on the floor, with his face turned away from him. The guard, of course, assumed that it was just another drunk or homeless man, because the man appeared to be dressed in dirty old clothes. Then he heard a strange crunching, sticky noise, as he called it, and he took a step forward to the man on the floor to see what he was doing to make that noise. As the guard approached, he said a massive rat, bigger than a dog, stood up from behind the man's body. It stood on its hind legs and jumped over the man, charging the guard right away, knocking the flashlight out of his hand and biting him straight through his glove. The guard screamed and said he threw the beast off of him and stumbled up the stairs and out the door, slamming it shut behind him. He ran back across the street to call the cops and an ambulance. I arrived just as the ambulance was leaving, so I never saw the man my coworker had found on the floor, but I was told he was all right. He had just passed out drunk on the floor. The rat had found him and began chewing on his hands and fingers. It apparently started on his face and neck as well. He had permanent scarring from the event. I'm just glad that I wasn't the one who had to see it. The man was pretty messed up after that event, and my coworker quit the next day, and of course went to get anti-rabies and vaccine shots. I can't say I blame him. That would be enough to chase me away as well. In fact, I didn't stay there very long afterwards, and I moved to another state for a better job. A few years later, my brother, who had worked with explosives while in the army, told me that he got a job at the same mill, the mill where I met the monstrous rat. The electronics manufacturer was no longer there, and the new owners wanted the first floor removed to make a high space for some other kind of business. My brother set explosives and dropped the first floor into the basement in what I was told was a pretty spectacular show. A few minutes after the floor went down, my brother told me he heard what sounded like gunshots, so he went to the corner of the building to look down the alleyway to see what was going on. There were 2 cops down there, my brother said, who were part of a detail to keep people away during the demolition. Their guns were drawn and smoking. They were aiming towards an open bulkhead door into the basement. My brother asked them what the heck just happened, and one of the cops shrieked at him, saying some freaking nightmare of a giant rat had started coming out of that door, and they shot at it. My brother went to look, but he couldn't find any such rat. But he said he was glad that he didn't see one, because he really hates rats. Night Shift Security Guard. Submitted by Aaron. I worked as a security guard for a few years after moving to a small city in British Columbia. It was a well-paying job, and night shifts were more my thing since I was kind of an insomniac. I had just turned 20 and was now 6'3" and 230 pounds. Just to give you some detail about myself, I was a bit of an intimidating guy, but everyone knew I was a sweetheart, and I never caused any drama with people. I prefer to be alone myself. My coworkers often called me Jay because I always wore a Toronto Blue Jays hat. Anyway, I worked at a rather well-known nightclub and worked only weeknights. The place was pretty nice and had a DJ and everything. Well, one Saturday, summer had just kicked in and the nights started to get warmer and warmer. My usual partner couldn't make it in that night due to personal problems in which he had to go visit a sick family member. The club wanted to call in someone else, but me, knowing how annoying it can be for work to suddenly call you in, refused the offer. I told them I didn't need the help, so it was just me letting people in that night. As the line got shorter and shorter, I was informed over the walkie-talkie on my belt that I would have to stay late since I had no partner to help me let people out. It was slightly irritating because the club runs fairly late anyway, usually closing around 3 a.m. It was only midnight then, and I realized that I would have to stand out there for 3 more hours. But I tried to think my best about it, so I responded over the walkie-talkie, joking, saying I better get paid double for this. After everyone was safe inside the club, I linked the red rope closed and leaned against the side of the building's wall. I decided to get on my phone and take advantage of the club's Wi-Fi. After about half an hour, I became bored of that and decided to have a cigarette. But before I could pull my lighter out of my pocket, a skinny man began walking up to the club from across the street. Slowly, I lit my cigarette and just watched him as he approached. I have pretty poor eyesight, almost legally blind, so usually I would either wear my glasses or contacts, but tonight I had been in a rush and I didn't have time to grab anything, so I couldn't really see the details of this man. All I could make out from this distance is that he was very skinny and dirty looking. The closer he got, the better I could describe him. He was almost sickly thin. He was wearing an old gray sweatshirt and ripped up blue jeans. He was shaven, but it was poorly done and uneven. His skin looked too pale and his eyes were sunken in. I tried not to judge though and continued smoking until he walked up to the rope I stood behind. "Could I get your name, sir?" I asked, since even though this is a club in a shady downtown area, we still had a list of people who paid an entry fee before showing up. We didn't take money on the spot, since we've had some incidences in the past with people bribing guards. He furrowed his brows at me as if in thought, then looked quickly at the list that was clipped to the other side of my belt. He then spoke. Thomas? James Thomas?" he asked, in a questioning manner which made him suspicious. Was he asking me or telling me his name? Not only that, but his voice was weird, like some sort of cartoon character. I ignored his tone and checked the list. Lucky for him, there was indeed a James Thomas on it. I quickly scratched out his name and picked up the rope to let him through. "Well, have a nice night," I said to him as he walked through the big metal doors into the club. He then replied just before entering the doors, saying, "Oh, I will." A couple of minutes later, no one else showed up, and it was now around 1:45. I would still have to stand there for another hour. However, a couple of minutes later, it was now 2 a.m., and there was a sudden shout from my walkie-talkie, which made me jump. It was a buddy of mine who worked as security inside the club. I didn't hear any words, just a loud yell, so I picked it up. "Ryan, what's up, man?" I asked calmly into the walkie-talkie. "Jay, get in here!" He was yelling over the bass of the music. I could barely even hear him over it. "What's going on, man?" I opened the doors and ran inside. One of the bartenders said she saw a weird homeless man with a knife. I quickly made my way into the main area where the bass of the music almost made me dizzy. The flashing lights and fog didn't make it any easier. Squinting, I slowly made my way to the bar, pushing past dancers and drunken men. When I reached my destination, the bartender, Eliza, explained everything to me. "Jay, he's skinny and pale, and I saw him walking towards the lounge." Eliza quickly gave me a vague description and began repeating herself over the music, almost hyperventilating. I tried calming her down, but she kept panicking and said that we should shut down the club and evacuate. I dismissed her idea, since the idea could trigger the man to do something irrational, and making this crowd of people panic could lead to some serious injuries or lawsuits. After finally calming her down, I began walking towards the lounge. I met up with Ryan on the way there. He was searching the lounge from a safe distance. Over here it was a little less loud, which meant you didn't need to shout over the music. "Do you see the guy?" I asked Ryan, but he shook his head. "All these guys are skinny and pale," he said to me, and even in this kind of situation, I let out a small laugh. I then looked into the lounge myself and noticed someone right away in the back corner. Even with my poor eyesight, I could tell that that was the same man that I just let in a few moments ago. It was the supposed James Thomas fellow. Knowing that I already had a suspicion of the guy, I tapped Ryan on the shoulder and motioned with my eyes towards the back of the room. He looked at the man and then back to me with a look that said, "You sure?" And I only nodded before walking towards James. As I approached, I noticed that he didn't have any empty glasses in front of him. There was nothing in front of him at all. This began triggering alarms in my head, since people only come to the lounge to drink in peace, meaning he came back here for some other purpose. Once I was right beside him, I spoke up, saying that I need him to step outside for a moment. Oddly enough, the man nodded, then got up and began walking towards the nearest exit. It was going far smoother than I expected. No complaints or anything. He didn't even lift his head up to acknowledge me. As we passed Ryan, who was on the cell phone with the police, I told him that I can handle it and asked if he could wait at the front doors for the cops. He agreed. Then I stepped outside with the strange guy. We were now in the alleyway that was located behind the building. The only light was a small light bulb that hung above the metal door. As soon as the exit door closed, the man reached for something, and I asked if he would keep his hands behind his back until the police arrived. But he kept reaching, and as I advanced towards him, he suddenly pulled out a knife. It wasn't huge, but it could do some damage if he knew how to use it. In a quick motion, one that I barely saw coming, he took a swipe at me with it, cutting open my chest, but luckily I had jumped back, so it was nothing more than a scrape. Now I was mad. So I grabbed his arm and disarmed him, and I pushed him to the ground. When he hit the ground, he began laughing while desperately reaching for his knife, which was now laying about 3 feet away. He just kept laughing, high-pitched and loud. And then he began to curse me, saying that he'll gut me like a fish and slit everyone's throats. This guy wasn't on drugs, he was just insane, and he really did want to hurt someone, just for the simple sake of hurting people. Soon, the sirens and police cars made their way down the alleyway. I let out a sigh of relief as I recognized the officer, who was another friend of mine, so he could tell right away that I wasn't the dangerous one here. Michael, the officer, approached me and quickly cuffed the guy as I kept him down. He picked the guy up once I got off of him, but the man was still laughing. As Michael stuffed him in the back of the cruiser, the man yelled out, "Stupid guard, you're the one who let me in. It was all on you." Which he was right. I did let him in. I didn't bother patting him down, I just let him stroll on in. I immediately cursed myself for being so careless. Michael and I made our way back to the front of the club. He took the car while I quickly walked to the entrance. As I rounded the corner, I watched as an ambulance passed by with its sirens on. As Michael once again exited the police car, I asked in a panic if anyone had gotten hurt. He nodded and told me that a man just 3 blocks down the road had been knifed 30 times. I gasped. I asked for the man's name in curiosity, and Michael told me. James Thomas, I think. Why do you ask? I froze there, and Michael obviously noticed this. I slowly turned to face his vehicle and noticed that the man inside, who I thought was James, began laughing and shouting at me. He was taunting and threatening me. I told Michael everything, and he quickly notified everyone and made his way back to his cruiser and back to the station. Another officer told me that I might need to be a witness in a court trial, but luckily for me, I never had to attend. The incident caused me to take a few months off my job. I didn't quit, since I did love that job. I wasn't going to let one bad experience ruin everything for me. The club doubled its security and made it mandatory for outside guards to use a hand metal detector. The whole thing did shake me up pretty bad, and it's kind of been burned into my head. I let a deranged man inside a populated club with hundreds of easy targets. Luckily, no, the only man that was attacked miraculously covered fully. But still, that crazy man could have injured a lot more people in the club, and I'm just glad Elisa was able to spot him, because if she didn't, this club would have never been the same, and it would have been all my fault. Security Officer, submitted by Jaden. I'm a security officer, and I had just gotten contracted to conduct fire watch at an elementary school that was in a not-so-safe neighborhood. A really bad thunderstorm had come through the previous night, striking the building, which caused the fire alarm system to go down. To enter the school courtyard, the area is surrounded by gates with keypads. The new supervisor needed to conduct a walkthrough with me at the beginning of the shift. I didn't really know the layout of the building, so coming up on a corner, I wanted to check it for any doors. My supervisor stopped me from checking, saying she needed to walk me through the rest of the courtyard and the perimeters, so I gave up and didn't argue, as me and the supervisor in question usually never see eye to eye on anything. An hour later, when conducting my patrol, I found a side access gate that could only be opened from the inside if you didn't have a key. The thing was, the access gate had been left open and was just hanging there. Without thinking anything of it, I just closed it myself, then went about my patrol as usual, not finding anyone at the time. However, a few hours later, around midnight, I had to go to the bathroom thanks to some Red Bull and coffee. So I entered the courtyard to go use the one single-person restroom that was left for us to use. After doing my thing, I slowly opened the bathroom door, only to see some skinny man who looked tweaked out of his mind, holding a knife. The man was twitching and shaking all over, his eyes darting in every direction all at once. He looked like he was about to explode. He was wandering the courtyard inside the gate. I don't know what he was looking for, but he was definitely looking for something or someone. Then he began to scratch his chest with the knife. The moment I saw this scene, I shut the bathroom door and locked myself in, immediately calling the cops. But the man had seen me, and before I knew it, he was banging on the door, yelling in a delirious voice that he needed me to open the door, or he would do the worst kind of things to me. Slow and painful things. Then I jumped back because he began to rake the blade of the knife under the door. That was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The cops finally showed up, but the man had left moments ago. Still, I waited for the cops to arrive, not ready to take any chances. The police conducted a search of the area, and unfortunately at the time, they weren't able to find the suspect. I didn't have much to give the cops to go on, as I only saw the creep briefly before locking myself back in the restroom for safety. Lucky for me, the thunderstorms from the previous night didn't take out the school's security cameras. However, due to the budget cuts, the cameras weren't manned 24/7. Still, the odds stacked against us. The man was caught the following day after the school district pulled the security tapes. The tapes showed that he had entered from the same side gate, the same gate that I'd found hanging wide open hours earlier. Long story short, I refused to cover any more shifts at the school, only for as long as we had fire watch duty. I'm still a security officer, but I'm going to do anything I can to be better protected, just in case there's a next time.
The Bird Grabber, from Garbin. The second job I ever had was a night shift security gig. I was honestly quite surprised I got the call back on that one, as I'd hardly had any experience working anywhere. I was a 19-year-old sheltered guy, but I'd always been taller than my peers growing up, so maybe that had something to do with it. I lived in a small college town in New England. The security guard position had me looking after an old mausoleum containing some family tombs. It was autumn when I started, and with the trees being bare or nearly bare, the place was absolutely creepy after sundown. It took me a few weeks to stop feeling that sort of dread or fear you get when you're alone in a very dark and creepy place. But yeah, once everything became routine for me, that feeling went away. I ended up working there for 3 years. I quit after managing to get a scholarship to finish up 2 more years at university and finally finish up my bachelor's degree. I wanted to focus on my school full time. Anyway, my shift began at 10 p.m. each night, and I'd work until 8 in the morning. That meant 10-hour night shifts 5 days a week. It was a gravy job, honestly. It did not take me long to get into the flow and theme of the place. Remembering my rounds became second nature in no time, and I would often even listen to true crime and paranormal podcasts on my phone via Spotify while walking around in the dark. You could probably understand why, at a certain point, I believed that nothing could scare me, or that I was at the very least ready for anything. But then came the longest night of my entire life. This was the night that I saw something that I'll never forget and will never be able to truly explain. It was nearly exactly a year after I started, so that would make it autumn again. The leaves were just starting to turn this year, but the temperature was beyond freezing already. I was doing my rounds with a sweater under my blizzard-ready jacket. While between rounds, I would make sure to keep the coffee pot hot and full. You could call it cozy, save for the couple of hours of rounds I had to do. During my second round for that night, I got up and downed a cup of coffee. Then I threw my toasty jacket back on and exited the security building. This building was little more than a well-insulated shed. Before you could step foot in the mausoleum from there, you'd have to walk through a small outcropping row of trees via a footpath. This outcropping was pretty short, but it was thick enough that you could not see the mausoleum on the other side, adding a bit of suspense when you walked through the footpath at night. So I made my way through, and a few minutes later I was in the mausoleum, checking the tombs and gravestones for tampering, and making sure no teenagers were hanging out on the hillside, smoking it up or getting frisky. That happened quite a lot, believe it or not. I made my way over to the archway of the main family plot when I heard the shifting of tree branches. There was little to no wind that night, so the moment I heard that sound, I knew that some branches were being shifted around by an animal or person. I listened closely, eventually suspecting that the sounds were a bit too heavy and slow to be that of a squirrel crawling around on them. I laughed to myself, thinking about how awkward it's going to be when I have to make my way to the tree in question, only to find a couple of kids trying and failing to make out in a tree. I rounded the edge of the main plot, where a tall poplar tree had stood for ages. When I turned the corner past a stone tomb, I found myself in full view staring into something nearly 7 yards away from me that shook me to my very core. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. My body went as stiff as a freaking board. It was an instinctual response. I'd never reacted like that before. I was terrified. Now, I'll describe to you what I saw, but I'll admit here that it's going to sound insane. Imagine a man with no clothes or hair whatsoever on his body. Turn his skin pale and nearly a super light shade of blue-green, then slather him with a viscous slime. And to top it off, stretch him so that he's half the width of a normal man, but twice the height. That's what I was looking at. Some sort of creature that was a nightmarish deformity of a normal man. It was so freaking tall. It was using its lanky arms to slowly reach into the branches of the poplar, pulling and bending them toward its face. Then it picked at the bark with its face and fingers, like it was searching for insects or small animals to consume. And then the worst happened. I somehow managed to choke on my own saliva, causing me to cough just once. The thing steadily turned and lowered its head a bit, soon finding me with its odd-looking eyes. Its eyes were these flat, straight, horizontal slits. They were so thin, I couldn't tell if they were closed or not, but I guessed that they weren't, because it looked at me and cocked its head to the side. It saw me, but it didn't seem to care. A few seconds of studying me over, it then went back to the branch it was, feeling up. I turned, and I power-walked my way back to the security building. I could hear that thing chewing on something and pulling at branches the entire way back. I quickly locked the door, telling myself that finishing the rounds this shift was not going to happen. I was not stepping foot outside until the sun was up. I survived the night okay. Didn't see anything else out of place or weird. Now, I didn't straight up tell my coworkers about the incident, but I did ask the other guards about the creepy things they'd experienced working here. The older guard who'd worked there the longest had stumbled upon torn and fallen branches a couple of times. He'd even found half-chewed up birds. Obviously, he thought this was odd. We didn't get enough wind around these parts to tear branches from healthy trees that often, and it was curious that the half-eaten birds he'd find were always next to these fallen branches. The other guard I talked to, a woman in her 30s, had frequently heard oddly heavy footsteps around the mausoleum, but she admitted she'd been too afraid to investigate when she'd hear these noises. Can't say I blame her. I never saw the creature again, but to be honest, that's probably because any further sounds similar to the ones that creature made, I completely avoided. I did not want to end up like one of those half-eaten birds or ripped off branches. Grave Shift Security Story from Kix037. When I was 20 years old, I worked at the University of Utah as a security officer. At that time, my now ex and I worked the same shift, which was the graveyard shift. Her name was Anne. Working on a big campus and also working nights, you always hear about haunted buildings, haunted places, all kinds of alleged spooks. Well, on this particular night, I was feeling adventurous, and I wanted to show Anne that I was an adventurous guy. So I drove us to do a building walkthrough of one of the supposedly haunted buildings on the campus. We pull up, and right away Anne says to me, "I have a bad feeling about this. I don't think I want to do this." She was obviously uneasy, but again, I wanted an adventure. After a few minutes, I managed to talk her back into it, and we began to walk into the building. Right away, I felt goosebumps all over my body. The inside was so dark, there was not enough light from the outside coming in. Many corners and dark spots were sheer blackness. I tell Anne, "Come on, let's walk through the building and see what we can find." I didn't want to necessarily provoke anything. I simply wanted to see if we saw anything weird. It was uneventful. Nothing happened except the creaking of the building, which was normal. But that all changed when we made it to the basement door. I opened it and looked down into the basement. I was met face to face with that sheer darkness, now enveloping everything in front of me. You couldn't even see the stairs. I pulled out my flashlight and I began to head down the stairs when Anne tried to stop me. "Jeremy, no. This doesn't feel right. It feels like we're being watched." I pushed forward anyway, and Anne, too afraid to be alone, followed me, hanging on to my shoulder. We got off the stairs of the basement, and still, I felt nothing. Yet the whole time Anne was telling me that we had to go back. The basement seemed empty except for cobwebs. I was scanning the basement, moving my weak flashlight slowly, when I noticed that the back corner had a small hallway that led to another room. I started walking towards it, and that's when things got weird. As I'm scanning the second room with the light, I notice that the only thing in that room is an empty chair. I scanned past it at first, not giving the object a second thought. It was when I was bringing the light back across the room when we noticed the chair was now facing a different direction entirely. It was now facing us as if someone was sitting in it and had angled themselves to face us.
Right away, this startled me. I began to feel that watched feeling that Anne had had. We slowly back out of the basement, and I swear I felt as if someone was standing over me. Anik was in a full-blown panic. "Jeremy, we have to leave," she said. I nod. We start walking up the stairs, and the whole time I'm looking behind me, just waiting to see someone. We make it to the top of the stairs. Anne tells me she's going outside and that I can stay in here as long as I want, but she's done. I tell her, "That's fine. Go sit in the car. I'm just going to make sure the front door is locked." Anne walks towards the back door where we were parked, and I walked around the corner to the front. I made sure the door was locked when I started to hear footsteps in the hallway behind me. "Anne?" I call out. I hear a few more distinct footsteps. I walk towards them, hesitantly, and I call out again, "Anne!" Just at that moment, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye by the staircase. I walk over to the stairs and stand and listen. Now I can hear footsteps upstairs, so I started to walk up them when I hear, "Jeremy, what are you doing? I'm not going back down there." I snapped my head up over the stair railing and saw Anne. She was talking to the open basement door. "Anne, what are you doing?" I said. She looked up at me and jumped. She was shocked. I saw you in the basement." "No," I responded. She continued, "You weren't just calling me back down to the basement?" "Jeremy, I heard your voice calling me from the basement." "Anne," I replied, "I thought you were upstairs. I swear to God I saw you walking up the staircase." I saw the terror in her eyes, so we both flew out of that building as quickly as possible. Once we made it to the point where we were calm enough to think about the situation, I began to realize whatever was in that house was trying to separate us. Something wanted me upstairs, while it tried to take her down into the basement. I do feel bad because she told me the entire time she was feeling like she was being watched. She kept telling me that she wanted to leave, but I didn't listen. That was 5 years ago, and our lives have moved into different paths. I am no longer with that university, but for anyone that starts as a campus security officer at the University of Utah, be careful of the buildings on Fort Douglas. Some of the stories you hear from that place are apparently true. Never Quite Alone, from Anonymous. My mom worked as a security guard for a company that sent her to various locations. One of the most interesting posts was at a popular soft drink factory. While my mom worked second shift, this shift still had very little actual workers present after around 6 p.m. or so. She would often regale me with stories of what would happen when she was all alone, or at least should have been alone. The most common incidents she would have would be hearing footsteps and the opening and closing of doors. These sounds occurred in the long corridor just outside her office and in the women's washroom down the hall. She said they never felt wrong or malevolent. My mom had worked there for many years. I would occasionally have to stop by or pick her up if we had to share a car for whatever reason. Due to this, I had on a few occasions witnessed the phantom footsteps myself. The first time it happened, my mom was so excited for me to experience it firsthand. I could clearly hear a man's heavy footfall back and forth all the way at the other end of the hall. "Now watch this," my mom excitedly exclaimed as she practically dragged me toward the sound. The sound grew louder the closer we got to it, but when we made it to the exact spot where the footsteps were happening, they went dead silent. If you didn't work there or deliver there, it was usually frowned upon to walk around inside the building. But I'm glad I had these experiences. Though creepy, they really show you that things go bump in the night, and they're not always so bad. Scary security guard in my building. From Anonymous. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 14 years old and pretty short for my age. I live in Canada, and I'd like to say I live in a relatively safe neighborhood. In my apartment building, I know everyone, even the staff, and because I'm so well known, the staff lets me and my friends wander around the building at night, so long as we keep quiet. You don't want to wake up the neighbors. One summer night, I was with my 2 friends, Jade and Derek. Jade, Derek, and I were walking around the building like we normally do, and had made our way up to the 10th floor to ask another friend if he wanted to come hang with us. Now, my building has 2 stairwells and an elevator. The 2 stairwells are on opposite ends of a long hallway, and the elevators are in the middle of the hallway. As we were walking towards our friend's door, we heard the stairwell on the opposite side of the hallway slam close, and there was a man walking towards us. The guy was huge. He was 6'8". He had gray hair and blue eyes, but only looked to be in his mid-40s. I had never seen him here before, and like I said before, I knew everyone in the building. This didn't scare me, but it did confuse me. The man was walking towards us, and I assumed he would just go to the elevators, but he didn't. He walked right past them. I knew for sure that he didn't live on this floor, so why did he keep going? My friend Jade finally noticed him, and as Derek also turned to see the man, the massive guy broke into a run and was coming right for us. Freaking out, I grabbed Jade and pushed her into the stairwell closest to us, yelling at her and Derek to run as Jade and I ran as fast as we could up the stairwell. We made it to the 16th floor before I realized that Derek was nowhere to be seen. We hadn't heard any footsteps, and our stairwell echoes loudly. I went back to look for him. I couldn't just leave him behind. So Jade and I ran back down, quietly opening every door to check for Derek until we found him on the 9th floor. He whispered to us to tell us we needed to switch stairwells and run down to the ground floor, the only floor with security cameras. The 3 of us jumped as we saw the man peering out of the stairwell, the one Jade and I had just come from. We bolted to the other side and ran down the stairs as fast as we could. We just reached the 4th floor when the door was heavily pushed open and the man stood there blocking our way. He began to scream and reach into his back pocket. He was holding something shiny and silver looking, but I couldn't see what it actually was before one of the neighbors came out of their room and asked what was going on. A couple of other sleepy neighbors woke up and entered the hallway as well. His expression turned to anger and fear. He obviously didn't want a commotion, and whatever he'd pulled out of his pocket was now back in his pocket. The man then walked away. We asked the neighbors who had come out first who he was, but she didn't know. This made me uneasy, obviously, and considering that I never saw the man again, even though we kept going out at night with friends, this led me to believe that he wasn't a security guard at all. But why was he dressed as one? And why was he chasing a bunch of children? Black-Eyed Trespasser from Eerie 78. I used to work as a security guard for a mall. I was the guy that had to lock up the doors after spending all day watching people a little too closely. I can't tell you how awkward it is and how irritating it is to have to go up to some teenagers on a bench and tell them not to sit in each other's laps. What a career. Needless to say, I did not enjoy the job, but something happened during my last year there that made me hate it even more.
It had been a long day full of rowdy, disrespectful kids and a couple of dudes who thought they'd be just fine drinking whiskey from some brown paper bags. When closing time finally came, I was so ready to just go home. I needed some sleep and a double dose of ibuprofen. I had to make sure everyone was cleared out before locking up. There were 3 sets of doors that needed locked: the northwest, the east, and the south doors. The northwest doors came first, and that went without a hitch. But next were the east doors. The moment I entered the east corridor, I could see someone standing outside. "Please stay out there," I mumbled to myself. If they came in, I'd have to confront them and tell them that we were closed, hoping that they wouldn't start a problem with me. Oddly enough, they just stood there, just outside the doors, watching me as I walked the full 30 yards or so to get to them. This took a moment, so seeing them stare at me for an awkward amount of time was pretty weird, to say the least. When I made it to the glass door, I saw that it was a woman. She appeared to be in her 20s. She was attractive and bore a big smile, which was quite warming to see, until I got a better look at her eyes. They were solid black, like someone had managed to pour a gallon of black food dye into her eye socket. When I saw this, I froze, and after a moment I opened the door slightly and spoke. "May I help you? We're closed for the night." She didn't hesitate to reply, nearly interrupting me. "May I come in for a moment?" Her voice was so monotone, while her expression was very animated. It seemed so off-putting. "We're closed," I repeated. "If you need to use a restroom, there's a McDonald's just a block that way," I pointed. "You're going to die," she said. Her smile didn't change. "The hell did you just say?" "May I come inside for a moment? There's not much time left now." Chills ran down my spine. I immediately closed the door and began locking them. There were about 8 doors there, 4 sets of 2 doors, and I was at the leftmost set. As I worked my way down locking each set, she followed me to each one, still smiling. I started walking away, considering calling the cops. Before I rounded the corner to the last set of doors, I looked back, and she was still standing there. I rounded the corner, speed walking to the doors. I was terrified she'd be there when I looked, which wouldn't be possible. It would take her much longer to get to these doors from the outside, due to the auto shop attached to that wing of the building. When I made it to the doors and looked up for my keys, I nearly screamed. There she was, right up against the glass with those black eyes and that eerie smile. I quickly locked those doors, then retreated to the security office, never looking up and never looking back. I was good to go home, but instead I clocked out and waited 2 or 3 hours, checking the corridors often. I never saw her, but I didn't believe for a second that she was gone. When I did have the courage to go to my car, I ran full speed like a scared kid. It was the creepiest moment of my life, and I'm so glad to not have to work there anymore.
The Rat, submitted by Solely Americas. Around 1980, I had just gotten out of active duty service with the US Air Force, and I decided to stay at my father's house in Massachusetts until I could find a place of my own. It wasn't easy trying to find a job, but soon I landed a security guard position with a big security company. This company had a contract to provide service for a big electronics manufacturer about 20 miles from my father's place. I had left the military with an honorable discharge and an old beat-up Chevy Nova and little else to my name, so I really needed the job. I drove my old car to the electronics company, where they gave me a baggy uniform and a big flashlight. My shift was to be from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning. I was given a tour of the buildings by the administration supervisor, which took nearly 2 hours. Let me tell you a bit about these buildings I was supposed to wander through all night. The place was a turn-of-the-century, massive 3-story brick mill that was originally built to manufacture textiles. It also had a huge basement and another smaller warehouse-like building across the street. The main building easily took up a city block and was one of the biggest structures in the small city. The interior had been renovated to accommodate offices, laboratories, manufacturing space, and other work areas. It was pretty much a maze in there, and the place stunk of chemicals for electroplating electronic components. It wasn't my idea of the best job in the world, but it was a start. I felt that if I put up with it in the meantime, then I might be able to move up in the company itself. That way I'd be all set. The building across the street was used by the electronics manufacturer to store things like packaging materials, old furniture, and other assorted junk. There were 2 ways to get into that building: either go outside and cross the busy street, or go through an old tunnel underground that ran under the street. It was part of the guards' rounds to inspect the big building and the building across the road several times every night. I've always been a night person anyway, and have always sought jobs where I could work alone. I hate having a boss hovering over my shoulder every minute, and I hate coworkers complaining and gossiping all around me. So checking through the dimly lit buildings was no problem for me, and it wasn't really scary for me. The worst was just having to call the cops a couple of times, because kids either tried to sneak into the ground floor, breaking bottles outside the front door, or they would do graffiti on the outside walls. Nothing really major or extraordinary. Not yet, anyway. What always bothered me, though, was that dang building across the street. It was a ragged-looking building. It looked to be even older than the main building. It had filled stone walls with big steel double doors in front, and no windows. One of the steel doors had a smaller door in the middle, and that's where we usually went to do our checks. When you opened the door, you had to go down about 8 stone steps to get to the warehouse floor. The filled stone walls were crumbling, and in some places, you could actually see through the cracks between the stones. I'd been told that sometimes drunks or homeless people had managed to get in there, either by breaking the small door or because someone had forgotten to lock it. I was warned to keep an eye out for these people, and if I saw any, to just get away from them, then call the cops if I found them in there. Part of my responsibility was not only to protect things, but to keep myself safe as well. Now, usually I preferred to cross the street to get to the other building, but one night it was snowing heavily and the wind was wailing like crazy, so I decided to use the tunnel underground. The tunnel was about 5 feet wide and easily 7 feet high. It was made of cobblestones that were always wet, and the place was colder than a freaking refrigerator. The tunnel was just a straight line across the street, but underneath, and there were small dead-end passages off to the left that only went about 10 feet before they stopped. I have no idea if that was all that was left of some other tunnel that connected to it, or if that dead end had some other purpose. Anyway, I started through the tunnel, which had no lights, so I was carrying my big flashlight and it was blazing a path through the tunnel. I was on my way to check the warehouse. I got about halfway down the 40-foot tunnel when a noise made me stop and listen. It was the sound of a scrabbling noise that stopped me in my tracks. I'd always suspected there might be rats down in the mill's basement and the tunnel, but I hadn't seen any in the 2 months I'd been working here. I slowly began to move my flashlight back and forth to each side of the tunnel, keeping an eye out for anything that might be moving. It didn't take long to see eyes being reflected back at me. Eyes that were a mix of green and yellow in the light, and behind them was a large and dark silhouette. And then I saw it move, and I knew right away what it was. It was a rat. A rat bigger than any rat I've ever seen, even in the movies. This thing was as big as a large dog. No joke. It looked like it weighed 400 pounds easy. It had very dark gray skin, with some white under its chin, and its eyes were huge too. In proportion, they were far bigger than they should have been. I kept my light on it as it began to step into the middle of the tunnel, still staring directly at me. Now, I'm 5'8", and I was raised near a swamp. I've seen my fair share of rats, but this was a completely different beast, and I mean that literally. In seconds' time, I decided that my security guard paycheck did not cover confrontations with monsters, so I took a step back from this abomination, never taking my eyes off of the thing or my light. If that thing wanted the tunnel to itself, it could have it. Then, the way a curious smaller rat would, this creature suddenly stood up on its hind legs, bringing its height to about my chest area, and showed me a mouthful of seriously needle-sharp teeth. Then it made this disturbingly ear-grating, high-pitched hissing sound. I had no doubt it was a "you shall not pass" threat, and I took it very much to my pounding heart. I wasn't going to come any closer. Slowly, I was backing up, never letting the creature out of my sight, until my back touched the tunnel door into the main building. And in one quick motion, I was out of there. Luckily, that evil thing just stood there the whole time, watching me retreat. The only mention I made of this confrontation was to the afternoon guard I relieved when I came on the next night. I was curious and a bit disturbed, so I just asked him if he had ever seen any rats in the tunnel. He said he didn't like going through the tunnel, so he never used it. Then he made a joke about being afraid of rats, and I just shrugged it off. So I decided I would avoid using that tunnel as well. I didn't want to risk running into that thing again. Only a few days later, this same guard was doing his last round, around 11 p.m. He went across the street to check the warehouse. He discovered that the small door that we used for entry was broken open, but being the brave fellow he was, he decided to go in anyway to check it out. He told me that he went down the stairs and took a few steps across the floor. He saw what he thought looked like a man lying on his side on the floor, with his face turned away from him. The guard, of course, assumed that it was just another drunk or homeless man, because the man appeared to be dressed in dirty old clothes. Then he heard a strange crunching, sticky noise, as he called it, and he took a step forward to the man on the floor to see what he was doing to make that noise. As the guard approached, he said a massive rat, bigger than a dog, stood up from behind the man's body. It stood on its hind legs and jumped over the man, charging the guard right away, knocking the flashlight out of his hand and biting him straight through his glove. The guard screamed and said he threw the beast off of him and stumbled up the stairs and out the door, slamming it shut behind him. He ran back across the street to call the cops and an ambulance. I arrived just as the ambulance was leaving, so I never saw the man my coworker had found on the floor, but I was told he was all right. He had just passed out drunk on the floor. The rat had found him and began chewing on his hands and fingers. It apparently started on his face and neck as well. He had permanent scarring from the event. I'm just glad that I wasn't the one who had to see it. The man was pretty messed up after that event, and my coworker quit the next day, and of course went to get anti-rabies and vaccine shots. I can't say I blame him. That would be enough to chase me away as well. In fact, I didn't stay there very long afterwards, and I moved to another state for a better job. A few years later, my brother, who had worked with explosives while in the army, told me that he got a job at the same mill, the mill where I met the monstrous rat. The electronics manufacturer was no longer there, and the new owners wanted the first floor removed to make a high space for some other kind of business. My brother set explosives and dropped the first floor into the basement in what I was told was a pretty spectacular show. A few minutes after the floor went down, my brother told me he heard what sounded like gunshots, so he went to the corner of the building to look down the alleyway to see what was going on. There were 2 cops down there, my brother said, who were part of a detail to keep people away during the demolition. Their guns were drawn and smoking. They were aiming towards an open bulkhead door into the basement. My brother asked them what the heck just happened, and one of the cops shrieked at him, saying some freaking nightmare of a giant rat had started coming out of that door, and they shot at it. My brother went to look, but he couldn't find any such rat. But he said he was glad that he didn't see one, because he really hates rats. Night Shift Security Guard. Submitted by Aaron. I worked as a security guard for a few years after moving to a small city in British Columbia. It was a well-paying job, and night shifts were more my thing since I was kind of an insomniac. I had just turned 20 and was now 6'3" and 230 pounds. Just to give you some detail about myself, I was a bit of an intimidating guy, but everyone knew I was a sweetheart, and I never caused any drama with people. I prefer to be alone myself. My coworkers often called me Jay because I always wore a Toronto Blue Jays hat. Anyway, I worked at a rather well-known nightclub and worked only weeknights. The place was pretty nice and had a DJ and everything. Well, one Saturday, summer had just kicked in and the nights started to get warmer and warmer. My usual partner couldn't make it in that night due to personal problems, in which he had to go visit a sick family member. The club wanted to call in someone else, but me, knowing how annoying it can be for work to suddenly call you in, refused the offer. I told them I didn't need the help, so it was just me letting people in that night. As the line got shorter and shorter, I was informed over the walkie-talkie on my belt that I would have to stay late since I had no partner to help me let people out. It was slightly irritating because the club runs fairly late anyway, usually closing around 3 a.m. It was only midnight then, and I realized that I would have to stand out there for 3 more hours. But I tried to think my best about it, so I responded over the walkie-talkie, joking, saying I better get paid double for this. After everyone was safe inside the club, I linked the red rope closed and leaned against the side of the building's wall. I decided to get on my phone and take advantage of the club's Wi-Fi. After about half an hour, I became bored of that and decided to have a cigarette. But before I could pull my lighter out of my pocket, a skinny man began walking up to the club from across the street. Slowly, I lit my cigarette and just watched him as he approached. I have pretty poor eyesight, almost legally blind, so usually I would either wear my glasses or contacts. But tonight I had been in a rush, and I didn't have time to grab anything, so I couldn't really see the details of this man. All I could make out from this distance is that he was very skinny and dirty looking. The closer he got, the better I could describe him. He was almost sickly thin. He was wearing an old gray sweatshirt and ripped up blue jeans. He was shaven, but it was poorly done and uneven. His skin looked too pale, and his eyes were sunken in. I tried not to judge though, and continued smoking until he walked up to the rope I stood behind. "Could I get your name, sir?" I asked, since even though this is a club in a shady downtown area, we still had a list of people who paid an entry fee before showing up. We didn't take money on the spot, since we've had some incidences in the past with people bribing guards. He furrowed his brows at me as if in thought, then looked quickly at the list that was clipped to the other side of my belt. He then spoke. Thomas? James Thomas? He asked, in a questioning manner which made him suspicious. Was he asking me or telling me his name? Not only that, but his voice was weird, like some sort of cartoon character. I ignored his tone and checked the list. Lucky for him, there was indeed a James Thomas on it. I quickly scratched out his name and picked up the rope to let him through. "Well, have a nice night," I said to him as he walked through the big metal doors into the club. He then replied just before entering the doors, saying, "Oh, I will." A couple of minutes later, no one else showed up, and it was now around 1:45. I would still have to stand there for another hour. However, a couple of minutes later, it was now 2 a.m., and there was a sudden shout from my walkie-talkie, which made me jump. It was a buddy of mine who worked as security inside the club. I didn't hear any words, just a loud yell, so I picked it up. "Ryan, what's up, man?" I asked calmly into the walkie-talkie. "Jay, get in here!" He was yelling over the bass of the music. I could barely even hear him over it. "What's going on, man?" I opened the doors and ran inside. One of the bartenders said she saw a weird homeless man with a knife. I quickly made my way into the main area where the bass of the music almost made me dizzy. The flashing lights and fog didn't make it any easier. Squinting, I slowly made my way to the bar, pushing past dancers and drunken men. When I reached my destination, the bartender, Eliza, explained everything to me. "Jay, he's skinny and pale, and I saw him walking towards the lounge." Eliza quickly gave me a vague description and began repeating herself over the music, almost hyperventilating. I tried calming her down, but she kept panicking and said that we should shut down the club and evacuate. I dismissed her idea, since the idea could trigger the man to do something irrational, and making this crowd of people panic could lead to some serious injuries or lawsuits. After finally calming her down, I began walking towards the lounge. I met up with Ryan on the way there. He was searching the lounge from a safe distance. Over here it was a little less loud, which meant you didn't need to shout over the music. "Do you see the guy?" I asked Ryan, but he shook his head. "All these guys are skinny and pale," he said to me, and even in this kind of situation, I let out a small laugh. I then looked into the lounge myself and noticed someone right away in the back corner. Even with my poor eyesight, I could tell that that was the same man that I just let in a few moments ago. It was the supposed James Thomas fellow. Knowing that I already had a suspicion of the guy, I tapped Ryan on the shoulder and motioned with my eyes towards the back of the room. He looked at the man and then back to me with a look that said, "You sure?" And I only nodded before walking towards James. As I approached, I noticed that he didn't have any empty glasses in front of him. There was nothing in front of him at all. This began triggering alarms in my head, since people only come to the lounge to drink in peace, meaning he came back here for some other purpose. Once I was right beside him, I spoke up, saying that I need him to step outside for a moment. Oddly enough, the man nodded, then got up and began walking towards the nearest exit. It was going far smoother than I expected. No complaints or anything. He didn't even lift his head up to acknowledge me. As we passed Ryan, who was on the cell phone with the police, I told him that I can handle it and asked if he could wait at the front doors for the cops. He agreed. Then I stepped outside with the strange guy. We were now in the alleyway that was located behind the building. The only light was a small light bulb that hung above the metal door. As soon as the exit door closed, the man reached for something, and I asked if he would keep his hands behind his back until the police arrived. But he kept reaching, and as I advanced towards him, he suddenly pulled out a knife. It wasn't huge, but it could do some damage if he knew how to use it. In a quick motion, one that I barely saw coming, he took a swipe at me with it, cutting open my chest, but luckily I had jumped back, so it was nothing more than a scrape. Now I was mad. So I grabbed his arm and disarmed him, and I pushed him to the ground. When he hit the ground, he began laughing while desperately reaching for his knife, which was now laying about 3 feet away. He just kept laughing, high-pitched and loud. And then he began to curse me, saying that he'll gut me like a fish and slit everyone's throats. This guy wasn't on drugs, he was just insane, and he really did want to hurt someone, just for the simple sake of hurting people. Soon, the sirens and police cars made their way down the alleyway. I let out a sigh of relief as I recognized the officer, who was another friend of mine, so he could tell right away that I wasn't the dangerous one here. Michael, the officer, approached me and quickly cuffed the guy as I kept him down. He picked the guy up once I got off of him, but the man was still laughing. As Michael stuffed him in the back of the cruiser, the man yelled out, "Stupid guard, you're the one who let me in. It was all on you." Which he was right. I did let him in. I didn't bother patting him down, I just let him stroll on in. I immediately cursed myself for being so careless. Michael and I made our way back to the front of the club. He took the car while I quickly walked to the entrance. As I rounded the corner, I watched as an ambulance passed by with its sirens on. As Michael once again exited the police car, I asked in a panic if anyone had gotten hurt. He nodded and told me that a man just 3 blocks down the road had been knifed 30 times. I gasped. I asked for the man's name in curiosity, and Michael told me. James Thomas, I think. Why do you ask? I froze there, and Michael obviously noticed this. I slowly turned to face his vehicle and noticed that the man inside, who I thought was James, began laughing and shouting at me. He was taunting and threatening me. I told Michael everything, and he quickly notified everyone and made his way back to his cruiser and back to the station. Another officer told me that I might need to be a witness in a court trial, but luckily for me, I never had to attend. The incident caused me to take a few months off my job. I didn't quit, since I did love that job. I wasn't going to let one bad experience ruin everything for me. The club doubled its security and made it mandatory for outside guards to use a hand metal detector. The whole thing did shake me up pretty bad, and it's kind of been burned into my head. I let a deranged man inside a populated club with hundreds of easy targets. Luckily, no, the only man that was attacked miraculously covered fully. But still, that crazy man could have injured a lot more people in the club, and I'm just glad Elisa was able to spot him, because if she didn't, this club would have never been the same, and it would have been all my fault. Security Officer, submitted by Jaden. I'm a security officer, and I had just gotten contracted to conduct fire watch at an elementary school that was in a not-so-safe neighborhood. A really bad thunderstorm had come through the previous night, striking the building, which caused the fire alarm system to go down. To enter the school courtyard, the area is surrounded by gates with keypads. The new supervisor needed to conduct a walkthrough with me at the beginning of the shift. I didn't really know the layout of the building, so coming up on a corner, I wanted to check it for any doors. My supervisor stopped me from checking, saying she needed to walk me through the rest of the courtyard and the perimeters, so I gave up and didn't argue, as me and the supervisor in question usually never see eye to eye on anything. An hour later, when conducting my patrol, I found a side access gate that could only be opened from the inside if you didn't have a key. The thing was, the access gate had been left open and was just hanging there. Without thinking anything of it, I just closed it myself, then went about my patrol as usual, not finding anyone at the time. However, a few hours later, around midnight, I had to go to the bathroom thanks to some Red Bull and coffee. So I entered the courtyard to go use the one single-person restroom that was left for us to use. After doing my thing, I slowly opened the bathroom door, only to see some skinny man who looked tweaked out of his mind, holding a knife. The man was twitching and shaking all over, his eyes darting in every direction all at once. He looked like he was about to explode. He was wandering the courtyard inside the gate. I don't know what he was looking for, but he was definitely looking for something or someone. Then he began to scratch his chest with the knife. The moment I saw this scene, I shut the bathroom door and locked myself in, immediately calling the cops. But the man had seen me, and before I knew it, he was banging on the door, yelling in a delirious voice that he needed me to open the door, or he would do the worst kind of things to me. Slow and painful things. Then I jumped back because he began to rake the blade of the knife under the door. That was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The cops finally showed up, but the man had left moments ago. Still, I waited for the cops to arrive, not ready to take any chances. The police conducted a search of the area, and unfortunately at the time, they weren't able to find the suspect. I didn't have much to give the cops to go on, as I only saw the creep briefly before locking myself back in the restroom for safety. Lucky for me, the thunderstorms from the previous night didn't take out the school's security cameras. However, due to the budget cuts, the cameras weren't manned 24/7. Still, the odds stacked against us. The man was caught the following day after the school district pulled the security tapes. The tapes showed that he had entered from the same side gate, the same gate that I'd found hanging wide open hours earlier. Long story short, I refused to cover any more shifts at the school, only for as long as we had fire watch duty. I'm still a security officer, but I'm going to do anything I can to be better protected, just in case there's a next time.
Ghost Stories from a Shipping Plant. Submitted by Tom. I've worked security for a few years now. If there's one thing I've learned while working security, it's that we often experience some creepy things. There is one place I remember clearly, in a certain rural Tennessee town. I worked at a big building that used to be a packaging and shipping product company. They would distribute various wares to stores. It ran 24/7 and was only closed on Christmas. At least when I was posted there, that's how it was. When I signed on, there was an old guard who had been there for years. One night he told me that it used to close on weekends, and during that time security would be the only ones in the building. They would hear screams from nowhere, as well as disembodied voices all over. I didn't believe him. I thought he was trying to scare the new guy, nor did I ever hear those voices. Though I did have a few experiences, all of which can be backed by at least one other witness. Before I continue, I should describe the posts where most of this happened. The entire facility is fenced off. There is an entrance in the front for employees and contractors. Around the back there are two gates, one for truckers and the other for what is called a yard dog. Basically our own private truckers who would move trailers between our two local sites. Across the street there was a lot. This is where drivers who were over their time could go to sleep. The first gate had a small shack and would be manned by 2 people. The other one had a smaller shack we called Gate 2. These experiences happened at the back gate and Gate 2 over my time there. This first experience happened to a friend of mine. After midnight, the back gate had the task of doing hourly patrols. It would take about 30 minutes on foot, but maybe 10 minutes in a car. So normally we used our own cars to drive it and get it done faster. It was my friend's turn, let's call him CM, to do his rounds. He drove off and about 2 minutes later, he already came back, and he was broken down into tears. He was a coworker and a close friend of mine, so right away I asked him what was wrong. He told me, I drove through this mist. It was like an odd fog, and suddenly I heard some strange music. I was just overwhelmed with utter sadness, and honestly I felt the urge to kill myself. So I had to come back. I can't go back out there, man. After he told me this, he flat out refused to go on any more patrols that night, though soon afterwards, other guards and myself would not blame him. One cool night, I decided to do the patrol on foot, and I had a bright flashlight with me. As I walked along rows upon rows of empty trailers, I heard loud banging coming from inside one. Now, it's not unheard of to have vagabonds and animals that had climbed into the trailers, and part of my job was to check for them. If we found anyone like that, we would call the proper authorities for the situation. I walked up to the trailer and peeked inside, and as soon as I did, the banging stopped. As I looked around with my flashlight, the trailer was completely empty.
This sent a chill down my spine and gave me goosebumps. I decided to walk away since technically there was nothing there. As I got to the front of the trailer, I heard this laugh that chilled me to the core and filled me with fear. Immediately, I ran back to the guard shack, and then I swore never to do the patrols again. On another night, I was with a female guard who we simply called Sarge due to her ranking and hard to remember name. One night we were sitting and talking, just passing the time. We suddenly saw a humanoid figure standing square in the middle of the unlit lot. He seemed to stand still until we both began staring at him. Then he raised his arms towards us and started to try to wave us down. But his movements were, for a lack of better terms, off. They didn't look quite right, but his voice was what really got our attention. In a loud, monotone voice, he shouted to us,
"Help me. I need some help."
It was like a bored high schooler was being forced to read a line from a play. Sarge handed me a flashlight and told me to go investigate. She said she'd watch my back, that she would call the emergency services if needed. I started to walk over, and the man was gone. Still, I had to investigate further. I went to the lot, and one vehicle had its lights on, so I knocked on the door and waited. And after a moment, a man answered. "Have you seen anyone out here?" I asked him, wondering if he was playing a prank on me. "No, sir. I'm the only one here who seems to be up at the moment," he replied in a voice completely different than the one we heard from the figure. This man's voice actually had emotion and expression in it. I started walking back to the shack, and the instant I turned around, all the dogs in the neighborhood began barking for no reason. When I got back inside the shack, Sarge looked at me and asked, "Why didn't you follow them?" I was confused. "What do you mean, Sarge? They were gone when I got there," I said. She shook her head. "No, they were standing there until you started to walk across the street. Then they went behind the closest trailer." Again, chills flooded over my body. Sarge and I talked about this for a few nights afterward, trying to figure out who or what that was. On another occasion, I was at the new gate, and Sarge was on her patrol. She came to check on me. Most nights were dead except for maybe 2 hours total, so we would spend time watching YouTube on our phones. At one point, she smacked the window and startled me as I was lost in some cartoon. I opened the window, then she asked me, "Who's with?" and then she stopped. She just vacantly stared at the empty doorway to gate 2's small bathroom. The next words out of her mouth were, "I swear to God, there was someone behind you. Even when I smacked the window, they were standing there." I thought she was still trying to startle me, but the look on her face was one of worry, a look of confusion and fear, like on the night we saw that man in the lot. After that, she was quiet the rest of the night, and sadly, only a few weeks later, she quit. After that, I took her position as sergeant. There was a lot of change in the orders. I would be in the main office, and once a night I'd do a foot patrol of all the posts. This would take about an hour, and I would carry a wand with me, like the kind you see flight crews use to guide planes for takeoff in movies. I would do the patrols around the same time every night. One night before I begin my patrols, I receive a call, and the guard at the back gate is surprised when I answered. "If you're on the phone, who's watching us?" she said in a confused voice. A bit of panic was slowly creeping in. To ease her mind, I told her that I would look on the cameras. They gave me the figure's location. I checked all 3 cameras that covered the area, and no one was there. But she continued, I can see him, he's standing right there. We thought it was you just watching us creepily, trying to freak us out." The panic was now apparent in her voice as I checked all the cameras over and over. I didn't see a soul on a single one, no one on any of the outside cameras either. The other guard hung up and refused to pick up the phone the rest of the night. When the next shift arrived, she left in a hurry, and she never showed up for her next shift. These are just a few of the strange things we saw there. Other guards told me stories of their encounters, but those are their stories to tell. Just remember, security guards see more than just shoplifters and loiterers. They also see the things that go bump in the night. Security job. Submitted by Tommy. I work in cleaning services and I do security up in the hills of Los Angeles in an old Christian church. I work the graveyard hours, and with that said, I'll start off by adding that this Christian church school is specifically in a remote area in the hills of Turnbull Canyon, which is already famous for its paranormal happenings. This experience happened to me around Christmas of 2015. I was 25 years old and had just started working for this company. Anyone who works the night shift as security knows it can be fun but mostly boring. But it can be creepy when things get strange. You never know when you can possibly be the victim of some lunatic or some paranormal things. The thoughts of something happening to me were always on the back of my mind when I worked. As security, I spend most of my time either watching YouTube or browsing Facebook. My job is to keep intruders out of the school for whatever reason. On one particular night, I was walking around with my flashlight when I heard a loud sports car storm in through the front parking lot. It was busting donuts and blasting loud music. Then it parks in a parking lot far from me by the entrance, and the driver gets out. He's a tall, bald-headed man. He looks middle-aged, and he was very, very drunk. I pointed my flashlight in his direction and explained to him that he couldn't be on the premises. At first he laughed and tried to convince me that it was okay. I shook my head, telling him he had to leave now or I was calling the police. He tried to convince me to let him drink on the parking lot. What's wrong with this guy? I finally had enough, and without hesitation I called the police. This obviously infuriated this man. I still had my flashlight on him, and he yelled at me with rage, cursing at me for pointing the flashlight in his direction. Then he began to call me all kinds of names, some I've never heard of. And no joke, the guy suddenly pulled out a freaking katana. You know, one of those samurai swords. He began to walk over to me quickly, with that sword at the ready. But halfway towards me, he turned around and ran back to his car, throwing the sword in the back seat. At this point, I'm thinking this guy really was crazy. Back in his vehicle, the man then drove towards me as fast as he could. I ran back to the church, my heart pounding like crazy, barely dodging getting run over by this lunatic. I was thinking, this freak has a sword and a car, and all I have was a 5-inch flashlight. I didn't have a gun, and they didn't give me one for the job. So even though I was a guard, I was basically at the mercy of some crazed, drunk lunatic. Luckily, I did have the keys to every door in the church, so I went inside the office, locking everything up. Suddenly, the lights to his car faded, so I peeked through the curtains of the nearby window, trying to get a look of what this guy was doing. Now he was kicking and tearing up the church flowers in a small garden. He was extremely mad. Just then I see flashing red and blue lights coming through the parking lot, and within seconds I hear the officer telling this man to get on the ground and all that good stuff. Cautiously and with my hands up, I walked outside over to the police officer so that the cops knew I was there. They asked me a few questions, and apparently the man was not only drunk, but he had also taken a large amount of bath salts. I still work at that church, only now I carry a handgun and plenty of ammo with me. I never want to be in a situation where I have to wait on the cops, like some sort of damsel in distress. No, if this happens again and I have to wait for the police, I'm going to be the one with the upper hand. Something was curious. Submitted by Nico. I work security for a hospital on Oahu, Hawaii. Back during September of 2015, I was patrolling the hospital grounds around 10 in the morning. I was out back in the oldest building on the property. It's 100 years old, give or take. This building is only 1 story tall, but it's quite long. It's split in half on the inside. One half has 2 conference rooms and the other is cold storage. And both sides have their own alarm systems with motion detectors. The conference room side is deactivated during the day for use, while the storage side is armed day and night unless someone goes in and deactivates the alarms. Both sides have their own exterior entrance, but no one uses the entrance on the storage side because the door is blocked on the inside. I enter the conference room side of the building, closing the door behind me. I walk down the hall to the center where the two halves meet and check the interior door leading to the storage side. This hall is shaped like the most irritating Tetris piece, so you walk, turn left, then right, and continue to the end. The door leading to the storage has a 10-digit keypad lock. After checking the door, I turn back. I'm almost back to the entrance when I suddenly hear a click, click from the other end of the hall. I go back through the blind corner and see the door leading to storage is now completely wide open, swinging ajar on my side of the building. I open the door, and all the lights are still off. No sounds of footsteps, rustling, scurrying, nothing. I even let out a confused hello, loud and clear, but there was no response. The building is old, wooden, and standing about 3 feet off the ground, so if anyone was there, I would have heard them moving somehow. I know I don't have the code to deactivate the alarm, but even still, I feel compelled to enter the room to see what happens. And I can't walk away either, because it's my job to make sure no one's inside. So I did what I had to. I stepped inside, and the alarm is set off. It's loud and blaring in my ears. Right away, I radio maintenance, asking for someone to come deactivate the alarm and telling them it's just me. They asked what happened to set it off. I told them that I had to enter the room, and when they asked why, I said the door opened on its own. Of course, they asked me to repeat what I just said, so I do, but they don't give me a response after that. Soon, a maintenance employee shows up and deactivates the annoying alarm. We check the storage side together, but still there's no one there. I tell him again what happened, and he's as creeped out as I am. This building is old, but the entrance I came through was closed, and all the windows have been sealed because there's AC in every room. The windows of the storage side are boarded up from the outside, and even if I hadn't entered, the alarm still would have eventually been set off by the door being left open, and if someone entered that room, they would have set the alarm off too. But whatever it was, it didn't. And this isn't a I accidentally left the door open kind of thing. This was a sealed door, ready to have a password entered to it, before it released its locks and opened. I hadn't touched it, yet somehow something opened that door. Horrifying security guard job. Submitted by Lauren. About 2 years ago, my mom volunteered me to help out the makeshift security team at my local high school for an upcoming cheer competition. This team was basically a bunch of dads and their daughters who stepped up knowing they would be paid for basically standing at the exits doing nothing. I was the youngest out of the helpers in the group at the age of 12, running paperwork to the organizers back and forth throughout the school. When I was not doing that, I was patrolling the dark, empty hallways with my friend Sid, making sure no young teens were doing God knows what, plus keeping people out or redirecting them back to the cheer competition. The high school had hallways that were laid out like a labyrinth, that you could make one turn and you would become completely lost in the dark. Now keep in mind the hall lights are off because the school was closed. The competition was happening outside. Though everything was dark, it never seemed scary to us, since we had been at that high school several times before, and the dark was not a fear that we shared. Well, not at the time. We ended up going through the hallways on a call that some people saw someone walking down the halls behind the cafeteria. They were seen going through the exit doors that had those little windows to look through. The organizers strangely weren't too worried about us going to retrieve this person, as they thought it could have been someone lost from the cheer competition. Plus, the only entrances that were open were where the rest of the security were, letting people through. Armed with flashlights on our phones and the bright yellow t-shirts on our backs that had the word staff written on them, we went into the dark hallways. At first, we thought finding this person would be easy, since you could hear the music from the competition, so it should be simple enough to follow it back to the doors. But as we kept walking further into the dark, deeper into the school through mysterious hallways, we realized this might be out of our hands. We continued walking until we came to the center courtyard of the school. we found a window weirdly wide open, with muddy footprints leading from it, as it had rained the night before. My friend Sid turned to me with a look of horror in her face, saying, "How could someone get into the school? The only other way was to climb over the roof." My stomach immediately got sick. This wasn't someone that was lost. This was someone who had broke in. I was thinking, who would break into the school and why? Sid ended up calling the cheer organizers on her phone to ask what to do. They told us to get back to the main office. There they would call the police. Not even 2 seconds after we hung up the phone, someone or something threw a water bottle, or what we thought was a water bottle, from around the corner, nearly striking me in the face. Whoever threw the bottle had a strong but strange strength, since this bottle went skidding down the hall, about 20 yards behind us. Fear had finally set in for me, as we could easily see an outline of a man, or what looked like it, hunched around the corner. Slowly backing up, we turned, and we ran. Sid was ahead of me, and I was right behind her. All the while, we could hear something very large following us through the halls, and I could tell by its footsteps that it was gaining on us, fast. Now, I was never a fast runner, but the fear of whoever this was catching me made me run through the pain as we came crashing down the hallway doors towards the cafeteria, right into the arms of one of the concerned organizers, and we were both in tears. Whoever or whatever that was following us was scared off when we met up with other people. We were brought back to the main office where we explained our story, not leaving out a single detail as the cops arrived. We were ordered to stay in the office as the cheer competition was put on hold as several cops swarmed the building looking for the suspect. Sadly, whoever it was, they never found them, and the thought of them still being out there made me sick to my stomach. My parents never volunteered me for this job again, and I lost contact with Sydney, who seemed more shaken up than me for some reason. So I never knew if there was more to her side of the story. I don't know if this crazy guy was trying to kidnap us or hurt us. I just hope we never come face to face with him again. The Babbling Shadow, submitted by Tom. I worked the night shift as security. I was at a location in a small town for about 2 months. There was a main building and a small guard building outside, where everyone had to drive through to get to the other building. My nights mostly consisted of watching the CCTV monitors, and on nights when no one else was there, I would patrol the outside area and inside of the building. Well, one night, I was looking through the camera footage as it played live, and I saw some sort of orb appear on camera, the camera outside the side of the guard building. I thought it was a bug in the footage, or something like that, until I realized it was just floating there. I looked outside to see if a puddle of water was reflecting anything, but my area is in a drought, and there hasn't been rain in days. I wrote it off as a camera glitch, until the orb began to change shape, and I soon saw a mist-like figure appear to be standing directly across the little road that ran past the shack. I looked out the window to the exact spot it should have been, but there was nothing there. I grabbed my cell phone and began to record it with my camera. This is a big no-no when working security. I filmed the figure on the screen for a bit, and suddenly the figure disappeared. This was not anything more than creepy, but I did message the video to my fiancée and her sister, who said that it was nothing, that the only thing haunted was the quality of footage on my cell phone. I wrote it off as nothing until October 8th of 2016. I was watching the monitors again late at night after finishing a patrol. As I watched the main building's motion sensor door open and close right as I looked over that camera feed, this shouldn't have been possible. There was nothing there. No wind blowing leaves by, no animals or people. No reason that the door's motion sensor should have went off. Immediately, I was filled with dread, and something told me that I was being watched. Then the clicking started. It sounded like someone was flipping the light switches on and off. However, the lights remained on. Then I realized it was coming from the other side of the dropped ceiling. Then another started and another. The noise multiplied, until there was about 6 different clicking noises in the ceiling, all out of sync, moving around in there. I reached into my pocket and grabbed my multi-tool. I convinced myself not to give in to this fear that was grasping me. I did not leave, and I even tried to get a look at what was making the noises. As suddenly as all of that started, there was just one last click, and it was all silent again. The fear and dread left with it, and I sat there nervously watching the cameras until my relief showed up. That was a very terrifying night. I've experienced a lot of strange things in my life, but this was the most dreadful and terrifying moment I've had. Chains and Shadows, submitted by Brian Watson. I've been a security guard for 15 years, and in that time I've worked a lot of different places, from air-conditioned office jobs to high-crime retail areas and bars. I've had to deal with everything from fistfights to even being shot at one occasion. But those are the things you accept as a possibility when you work in security, the dangers you prepare yourself for. It's a different story when the threat you face isn't made of flesh and blood. I had worked for this one particular security company for a few years. It was a smaller company, but it was by far the best I'd ever worked for. The other guards were great, and the working conditions were not bad at all. I'd been there for a year or so before I was promoted to supervisor. Part of my tasks included checking on the other guards assigned to my post. That post was a shipyard in a small place called Bayou La Batre in Alabama. Anyway, I was making my rounds and checking on my night guard. Let's call him Jake. Jake was the company's range officer and weapons expert. He's a big guy who is always ready for a fight. But this night was different. Jake was sitting in his truck on the yard when I arrived. His eyes were wide, and I could tell that he was shaken up. Jake of all people, I thought. When I asked what was wrong, he simply said, "There's something wrong with this place. I've been hearing things all night." "Like what?" I asked. "Well, chains," he replied. "Chains?" "Yes, chains." For those unfamiliar with shipyards, they are full of heavy equipment, welding machines, cranes, and the ubiquitous chainfall. This is basically a chain and pulley system used to lift and move heavy objects. They require a person to pull the chain and lift it. According to Jake, he was hearing this happen, but there was no one else here. Now, again, I've been working security for years. At that time, I dealt with a lot of strange noises, and more often than not, it's some stray or wild animal getting into something they shouldn't be. Stray dogs and cats are a familiar sight in the bayou, so I was ready to believe that that's what he heard. So we both approached the warehouse, where he had heard those chains. As we approached, we both began to hear the telltale sound of chains. It was as if someone had just pulled the chains as hard as they could, like the Hulk was playing with a set of chains like jump rope. Both Jake's and my hands fell to our guns. We moved closer, cautiously, to see what had happened. Slowly, I entered the warehouse. But there was nothing there. No chains, no cats, no intruders. When I looked back, I noticed Jake was still standing outside. I thought he was right behind me to back me up, but he was having none of it. "You really just let me go in there alone like that?" I asked. "You heard those chains. Only the two of us are here. Something pulled those chains, and it's something that I don't want to mess with." I was trying to calm him down. Sure, the sound was weird, even weirder when I couldn't find any chain falls, but there was always an explanation. There had to be. I did my best to calm him down and to keep my composure as his supervisor. As we talked, it happened again, but this time, it sounded like multiple chains were being pulled at the same time. Both Jake and I heard it, and Jake had had enough. He said he was going to finish this shift and never come back to the yard. The following day, I followed up with the warehouse supervisor. I told them about the noises we heard. I said that they might want to check to make sure they didn't have a rodent infestation or some malfunctioning equipment. But the supervisor just smiled at me. They said, "That wasn't any equipment. That's the ghost, and I see you finally met him." "Ghost?" I asked. Definitely. We've all had experiences here. Sometimes it moves things, other times it will touch you. Some people have claimed to see a shadow walking around, but it won't hurt you if you leave it alone. I was stunned. They said this as a matter of fact, as if it was a normal occurrence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Well, Jake never did work that yard again, but I continued to. In my time there, I learned that the supervisor was right. There was something there. I spent many nights seeing shadows that I couldn't explain. And being alone and hearing those chains was a commonplace thing. But I never got hurt, and I never tried to pursue it. Whatever is there is real, and if it can pull chains and walk around, I wonder what else it could do. I wonder what it could do to someone who got a little too curious.
Curious Dark Figure. From Anonymous. I'm a security officer in the Milwaukee area, and I've been at my current posting for a few months, working the night shifts. The business, I guess I could say, is a hotel for the sick and their families. It's newly built and less than a year old at the time of writing this. It has 2 floors with windows lining every wall. It's a very nice property to say the least. As the security officer at this business, I was tasked with monitoring cameras and every so often patrol the property to make sure everything is locked and no one is loitering on the property. There's only one security officer for each shift. When I first began the posting at the end of summer 2021, everything was going on as normal, and the nights were quiet. This continued for a few weeks, but around week 3, I began getting the sense that I was not alone, and I had the feeling of being watched. Perhaps I was just tired from long days of work, so I just chalked it up to me seeing things. So I continued my shifts as normal, until one day I started to see a dark figure out of the corner of my eye. When I looked up, the dark figure quickly moved behind one of the pillars. I stared for a while and even got up to take a look around the pillar, but nothing was there. I continued to monitor the cameras, reading a book, when I suddenly heard 2 taps on the window behind me. Not in quick succession, but about 2 to 3 seconds apart. They were not by any means light taps. It was more like a thud, like someone was trying to get my attention. I took out my flashlight as the lights were all off. I looked around, but I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. So I sat back down at my desk, going back to my business as normal. I know in hindsight, I should have investigated more. But at the time, I could not explain why it was happening, although the thought did linger in the back of my mind. When the time came, I began my rounds, and while walking down the southwest corridor of the building, I got the feeling of being watched again, and like any normal human being, I looked around. There wasn't anything in front of me, so I looked over my shoulder and my heart dropped. A dark figure slowly moved behind a doorway and disappeared. Was it just a shadow of a passing car? I thought to myself. My heart was definitely racing at this point, but I continued to walk down the hallway, occasionally looking over my shoulder. At the end of the hall are a set of windows before leading downstairs, and because it was dark outside, the window reflected like a mirror. About halfway down the hallway, I looked up at the window and see what looks to be a head sitting above my right shoulder. I immediately turned around, ready to confront someone, and again, no one was there. My heart was pounding, and I almost didn't want to continue my rounds, but I had to. It was my job. I know you're going to say I should have noped out of there, but I kept telling myself, this can't be real. I must be so tired I'm just seeing things. The whole time I felt like I was being watched, and the hair was standing up on my neck like they were going to pop out of the pores. While on the lower level, I had to use the restroom before continuing on. After I finished my business, I washed my hands,
and while I turned the water off, I could have sworn I heard footsteps outside the door. I opened the door, and I looked in the lounge area and down the corridor, but nothing. If there was someone there, I would have seen them. Again, I thought I was just hearing and seeing things because I was getting tired. I walk not even 15 feet towards the northwest corridor, and the soap dispenser goes off twice in the bathroom, adjacent to the one I just used. Having just walked past it, I knew there was no one in there. I thought to myself, my shadow must have caused the motion sensor to go off. There is a light in the hall there, but again I shake my head and continue to walk on. My rounds include going outside, to which I felt a great relief when I walked out. I continued my normal route around the building. I was getting close to the garage, and I couldn't believe it. I looked up at one of the windows in the offices, and the outline of a dark figure was just standing there, looking down at me. I quickly shined my flashlight up at the window, but by then it was gone. My anxiety was through the roof now. I went inside and sat at the desk, refusing to move and do my rounds. Only until people started moving about when the sun came up did I gain back my composure somewhat. The staff of the building began to arrive later in the morning, dropping their belongings in the office. One of them came up and asked how the night went, to which I replied, it was all right, and I explained that it felt as if I was seeing things. The thing I didn't want to hear next was what she said. Yeah, we're thinking this place is haunted. There have been some weird happenings going on in the building, and I think it might be because the business across the street is trying to expand, and they found out they were digging up a burial ground. Maybe the disturbed spirits came over here. Just hearing those words made the sense of dread reign over me, because now I knew I was more than likely being stalked or watched by something. I began to explain to her about what I'd experienced overnight, and she had a very shocked and disturbed look on her face. After I left for the day, I spoke to the other security officers, and they too have experienced similar sightings, that feeling of being watched. However, each of them has said they haven't experienced anything other than that. One of the security officers that worked there almost refuses to come back. It's been 3 months now, and on occasion I'll get the feeling of being watched, hear footsteps along the hallway, and I'll see a dark figure. But nothing else has come of it. After a while, I began to lose that sense of being scared, and figured it must be a friendly spirit if there is one. But I still get that anxiety of being watched, with the hair rising on the back of my neck. I'm hoping this is just a curious ghost, and not something more. If something more sinister does happen, I'm not too sure I'm going to keep working here. I'm never going to be a security guard. From Daddy Matty. So this story took place a few years back when I was 17. I was asked to patrol a local goat farmer's ranch at night for about 2 weeks. The farmer was a family friend and a neighbor to my Nana and Papa. We can call him John. My Nana and Papa own a farm about an hour outside of town in northern British Columbia, Canada. Being that Halloween just passed as of writing this, I was reminded of this story. Around the time of Halloween, goats go missing from farms often. Many farmers believe that witches steal them to sacrifice them on Halloween. I always thought they were just rumors, so I agreed to help patrol John's farm. The farm is close to 100 acres of land, so there was more than one of us helping out, a total of about 40 people. We all knew each other. That's the kind of thing you get in a small town. We were split into groups of 4 and had 2 ATVs between the 4 of the group. By now, I was starting to realize that John was not messing around. Most people from around that area owned a gun of some sort, and we were asked to have them with us while we did our rounds. Because I didn't live in that area, I didn't own a gun, so in my group, I was told to drive one of the quads.
On the first night, we were given our instructions and areas to patrol. So, feeling all tough and cool, my group members and I got on our quad, with one person driving and one person scanning the area. So, 2 to each quad. Me and the guy with me, let's call him Mark, jumped on our machine and waited for the other group members to get settled into their machine. We'll call the other 2 Jack and Bill. The first 4 nights went normally, with the occasional twig snap and deer jump out of the darkness that gave us a small fright. But that was the last of the normal parts. The sun was rising, signaling the end of the 5th night. Mark, Jack, Bill, and I all began to drive back. While we were cutting through an area that we were not assigned to patrol, we saw a large brown lump on the ground. We drove up to it, and what we saw shocked me to my core. It was a half-skinned cow with weird runes burned into the half that still had skin. This was not one of the stereotypical cattle mutilations. Most of those have surgical precision cuts, but this one was very rough, with sloppy cuts. This made me think it was caused by a person. We radioed John, as well as the group who was supposed to be patrolling that area. Aside from the assumption that this was done by a person, we were all puzzled. We tried to find tracks leading towards or away, but we couldn't find any. Whoever had done this, they were good at covering their tracks. Anyway, we dealt with the cow, and the proper authorities were contacted. After this, I went home to go to bed, and to get ready for the next night. The following night, John put his nice cattle away, leaving the goats and not as nice cattle outside. Now, before I continue, John did not put all his animals away because he didn't have room. He was used to being able to let them out. We were reassigned new patrols that pushed us closer to the main area of the farm. I thought this was a very bad idea. Now, Watt or whoever was out there just gained about 5 acres of ground on us. The next few nights, nothing as extreme happened, but what did happen next was quite abnormal. Every time we drove by this one area, a perfectly white goat ran across the field in the distance. We all assumed this goat was just playing around, with somewhat of a personality, trying to keep up with us. This happened for 6 nights. I then decided to ask John about this white goat, but he told us that he doesn't own a white goat. Freaked out by this, we decided to chase that goat down when we saw it again. We felt safe because we were about as well armed as a Canadian can get. With 2 shotguns, we were ready to get that goat. Sure enough, we saw it running one night. But as we were chasing it down, Jack and Bill's quad started to overheat, so we had to stop. By then, the white goat was gone, and all the machines were back in working order, so we continued on with our duties. Throughout that night, stuff was coming out of nowhere and hitting our machines. We just brushed it off as sticks that were flicked up by the tires. But the next night was the night. At the start of the night, our group got together and prepped our gear and machines. We made sure both quads' cooling systems were in order, readying ourselves to chase that goat again if we saw it. I wish to this day we didn't decide to chase after that goat. Sure enough, just as the nights before, we saw it. We started to accelerate and chase the goat down into some bit of woods. We continued on through the trees. But then, after we turned a corner, it was just gone. At first, what we thought was a large stone began to move. This almost decaying-looking face spoke to us.
Why are you chasing my friend?
It said. I responded, "Sorry, miss, this is actually private property. It's a goat farm and cattle ranch."
I didn't ask where I was. I asked why you were chasing my friend.
Jack spoke. "Well, this being a goat farm and your friend being a goat, we thought it was one of John's goats that got loose. We were trying to bring it back to the group." Bill chimed in too. "We're sorry. We didn't know it wasn't one of his.
but this is private property, you can't be here." Mark, being an idiot, gestured towards his gun and quoted the old movie Home Alone. "I'm gonna give you to the count of 10 to get your no-good dirty keister off this land before I pump your guts full of lead," or something along the lines of that. The woman then yelled,
Watch your tone, boy.
but when she yelled, it sounded like there was 1,000 people also yelling behind her. The woman then began to run at us. Out of fear, I had said under my breath, "Oh Lord Jesus." We didn't want to hurt the woman. She then stopped and took a few steps back, saying,
No, not that name. You can't say that name. He'll be angry.
It was at that moment we all looked at each other and yelled at the top of our lungs, "Jesus." She then ran off into the night. Now, I've heard before that witches don't like when you say the name Jesus, but I had no clue it actually worked, or if this woman was just psychotic. If she was a witch, I've no clue what type of deal with the devil she'd made that made her so confident to attack people with guns. And I wonder who she was talking about that was going to be angry with her. But I hope she never sees another member of society again, and if she does, I hope it's someone that can give her some mental help. After that encounter, we all quit and never set foot on John's ranch again. I know I wasn't a security guard, but there is no other title I could call myself for this story. We were working security after all. I can tell you this, I will never be an actual security guard no matter what, where and who I'm guarding. Not after something like this. Overnight in the hotel. From ML. I did security for about 4 years, starting back when I was 19. I'm 27 now. Starting after my first year, I switched to working the night shifts in my area for extra cash. My regular account was a hotel right on Lake Champlain in the heart of Burlington, Vermont. The previous night guard became the overnight receptionist right after training me on the account. This will be relevant later in the story. My duties were to patrol through the entire hotel once every hour, from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly just to make sure none of the large homeless population here would try squatting in a broom closet or such for the night. There were plenty of rooms in this hotel that would give you chills, like 2 of the 4 boiler rooms or the dark concrete corridor in the basement, where the security office happened to be. The worst was always the 5th floor, though. It didn't matter what time of night it was. If you were on that floor by yourself, your hairs would stand on the back of your neck and you'd always be looking over your shoulder. The layout of the hotel is like a lightning bolt. It has a staircase on both ends, one in the middle, and the elevators are just past the middle curve of the bolt. Relatively quickly, I noticed the unease of that floor. There was a light on the wall just outside the room next to the middle stairs that would periodically begin flickering at random times. It would happen one night and not the next, but it was a very regular occurrence. At first, I paid no mind to it. As I observed it more and more, though, it started to make me a little uneasy for some reason. Almost like the energy in the area was different when it happened. After a few months of this, it got to the point where every time I would get to that floor on patrol, I would stop at the staircase doors that had windows on them and peer down the hallway, almost like I was expecting something to be there. It sends chills down my spine just thinking of that feeling, but thankfully nothing ever was there. On a few separate occasions, I was patrolling that floor when I heard the elevator ding from around that middle curve. This wasn't unusual, as guests would be in and out of their rooms all night, since the hotel is a stone's throw away from the downtown bar area of Burlington. However, on these occasions, the elevator doors would swing right open in front of me, just as I was walking past them, revealing them to be cold and empty. Now, if you know elevators, then you know this would only happen if somebody hit the up or down arrows on that floor. I guess somebody could have hit the button inside the elevator, but that wouldn't explain the timing or the fact that no other floor buttons were active. This was not the top floor, so there would have been more activated if somebody had just hit them all. After the third time this happened, I mentioned it to my previous coworker, the receptionist. She confirmed my suspicions and said she always felt the same way on that floor. In fact, it was half the reason she switched occupations. That and the better pay, of course. She went on to tell me that in the far past, there was a murder in the hotel. A man had brutally killed his girlfriend on the 5th floor. He wrapped her in the carpet and dragged her body to the elevator, then to his truck, where he drove to the middle of nowhere and disposed of her body. I never told her about the flickering light, but she told me it was in that specific room, right next to that flickering light on the 5th floor. I didn't believe her at first, but after a very, very long browse through the internet, we managed to find an old article about the murder. It was true. I only worked at that account for a couple more months after that, and never questioned my unease of that floor again. This may not be the scariest first-hand account, but I tell you what, I grew up in a haunted house, and I'm very curious of the paranormal. But I will not go back to that hotel ever again. Anonymous Security Guard Stories, a 4chan thread from August 1st, 2020. Hi X, I was wondering if any of you have been security guards. I myself do the odd job occasionally, and have some spooky stories to tell. If anyone would like to share their own, that would be great. Anonymous replies, I got a security contract to assist rangers in a deep forest. My shift was from 1800 to 0500. The pay was crap, but no interaction with normies, so it didn't bother me. I got to drive a company car, and essentially I got the whole forest to myself. Camping was forbidden at this forest. The job said to just report if you see any suspicious persons on site. Cameras are positioned at some parts of the forest, but would not be able to see any trespassers until notified by surveillance. I don't question it and drive in circles for a few hours, keeping an eye on things. There was no phone reception out there, at least for me. By 8 p.m. it was pouring rain, so visibility was essentially down to about 5 meters. It was the middle of summer, so it was heavy jungle-type rain that caused a lot of mist. At about 2 a.m., the mist was rolling in like crazy, and I couldn't see at all. At the time, I didn't really seem to care, so I kept driving and patrolling. Suddenly, I began to see shiny eyes dotting the sides of the road. They were catching the headlights of my car, and they looked really low to the ground. I pulled over to see what the heck it was, but when I do, it begins to move in the middle of the road. I realize then my car is further away than I thought, so I pull closer to get a better look. It doesn't move, just sits there in the middle of the road. I lock the doors just in case. I put on my high beams, and I slowly roll forward towards the eyes in the road. It looks like this small goblin-like creature. Then I realize it's actually a freaking huge owl, with its head cocked to one side and turned towards me. Nope, I drive around it and haul tail out of there. I see more pairs of eyes on the road as I drive past, watching. I can't help but cry as I go. I get to the entrance of the forest and calm myself down, and luckily the rest of the shift was okay. An anonymous user replies, Wait, so was it something supernatural or just a bunch of big weird owls? The OP of the story replies, They were supermassive owls. I didn't know they stood on the side of the road like that, and I didn't know they were so freaking big. I have never seen owls like that before. I also didn't know they walked distances like that. There were 10 to 15 of them in bunches. Weird as heck. Another anonymous user posts, I've had a lot of time in the security world, and my favorite gig was an armed patrol security company I used to work for.
We'd primarily run security for Section 8 complexes. I was OIC of this in a major US city. The adrenaline rushes are addicting. So these Section 8 complexes get pretty ominous at night. The freedom of patrol is being able to respond to calls and really stretch out your legs during a shift. If one area was calm, you could head out to an area that needed you. Anyway, it was around 2 a.m. one night. I was patrolling in a complex comprised of multiple 3 to 4 story buildings. The place was so bad, we were often armed. I rolled around to the rear of the building. I noticed one of the boards to a dilapidated building is ajar. We would clear these buildings for vagrants and other illegal activities. I exited my patrol car to look around the area, and it's dead quiet. I figured I'd clear the building because it'd give me something to do. Once I get inside, I look around. The regular, once occupied dwellings have signs of a previous life. I always wondered who lived inside here, what decisions in their life led them here, what exactly happened that caused their building to be taken over by gangs and them being forcefully moved out. I'd always find the odd illegal letter here and there, the odd children's drawing of their family or of the sun and flowers. I round the corner of one unit, and I find something interesting. I find a hole. I figure I can get through there pretty easy, and I'm curious on what's on the other side. I'm getting drywall all over myself, inhaling the good old asbestos. I'm now a dog on the hunt, basically. I find a series of holes, one leading to the next. This building is pretty big, mind you. It had to have had maybe 50 units inside. Honestly, I was having fun in this labyrinth. I was still going deeper into the abyss, constantly finding graffiti around. Sometimes it was a menu of services in the area. Other times it was just some kid screwing around. I figured I had to be getting closer to the end of it. There shouldn't be that many units left. I would always stop and read what I came across. Sometimes it was intel, but I would always think of myself as an urban archaeologist of sorts, absorbing everything I could find. I finally reached the end of my whole journey. The end has a bigger room attached to a smaller room to the side. Clearly, this is the sin room. I find a bunch of smashed phones in one corner, and trash littered about, signs of people that were in this room not too long ago. Then I start to find a lot of bullet casings about the area. I made sure to document one. I see the last room I haven't looked into yet. I enter the last room, and that's when I see it. The danger zone. I take a pic when I realize where I'm at. Deep in a labyrinth that no one's supposed to know about, that no one knows I'm in, and my radio is out of signal range and I have no backup. There's a bunch of crap in front of me. There's blood on a mattress. When I go in for a closer look, I hear a series of footsteps in front of me. Immediately, I'm deep behind enemy lines, and I need to get out of here. I'm not a cop, and I don't give a crap what happened here. I just needed to leave. I book it back through the holes and I get back to my car. I light a cigarette and hit the road to calm my nerves. From the looks of it, I think this was an execution site for some gang. I don't know. I just didn't want to stick around and find out. After all, this place had murders every month at least. It was honestly the worst I've ever been to. It's now been demolished, but I find myself thinking about that urban labyrinth now and then, wondering what stories happen there. An anon by the name of Orion posted. I worked as a guard at an asylum. I was walking by a shower, and I hear someone inside mumbling something. I pound on the giant metal door. Then I hear a voice. "Hey man, gotta get out." I had the shower key, and I had the door open within a few seconds. But when I opened it, there was no one inside. I stepped in to search the shower. The lights were off, so I had nothing but the dim light from outside the shower and my flashlight. Then I heard the voice of someone mumbling next to me. Before I could make out what they were saying, I thought, nope. I step out and slam the giant steel door shut. But then, I hear the water inside turn on. It couldn't have been the door slamming that caused it. To turn the shower on, you have to mash a button,
and hold it for a few seconds. So I just walked away. Crap like that was so common at one point, I barely reacted to it.
Stable Security by Argos. A couple of summers ago, I worked as a stable hand on a farm just off a main road that led into town. The farm used to be a safe haven for illegal immigrants to squat in outside of Chicago, but it's been restored since then. Up until this point, I had mostly worked cleaning out horse stalls, taking the cattle in and out of the pasture, and making sure all the animals had food and water. One day, my boss, let's call him JC, asked me to stay late to watch over the stable while he attended a horse race in a nearby town. I accepted, of course. Otherwise, this would be quite the boring story to tell. I ended up stocking up on snacks and bought an entire 2-liter of soda to keep in the old gator cart we had in the barn. I drove around the property a few times to make sure everyone had gone home for the night, then brought the remaining horses inside before I decided to head inside myself and take a break and eat some dinner. I was a regular makeshift security guard, and it was kind of fun. At least for a while. Right away, I knew something was wrong when I found the large doors leading into the section of the barn JC's horses were in wide open. I didn't see anyone inside, and I had initially assumed my boss had come back early, so I parked the gator outside, blocking the exit so if anybody was sneaking around, they'd have to climb over. I looked around for about 20 minutes, coming up with nothing, but I did notice that the pen in the barn that the goats were kept in was open, and the goats had escaped. A couple of the goats were still in the pen, but the rest had made their escape. I now made it my duty to wrangle the rest of the goats before my boss returned. Otherwise, I'd be in a heap of trouble. As I walked about the rest of the barn and stable, I managed to find and chase back all but one of the goats. I had no clue where the last one was before I suddenly heard a loud crash from the kitchen area of the attached offices. I headed over, but strangely enough, I could hear something else. It sounded like one of the goats had tried to run out the still open barn doors. I raced over as fast as I could, only to catch what looked like a pair of rather large Hispanic men climbing over the gator I'd left parked in the way of the doors. I was about to tell them the stable was closed for the day when I noticed that one of them was armed. I could see the handle of what looked to be a firearm sticking out of the waistband of one of the men, and before I could hide, they spotted me. Thinking fast, I blurted out the first thing I could think of. "Hey, either of you seen a goat running around here?" I called out. They looked puzzled for a moment before they finally replied. I didn't know much Spanish at the time, but I did catch the word cabra, which, if you don't know, is Spanish for goat. I shrugged my shoulders a bit, watching the two men before I decided to duck around the corner, pretending to resume my search of the missing goat as I leaned against the wall, straining to hear. The two men talked for a while, and I could hear them trying to open the doors to some of the horse stalls. They were locked though, which thankfully proved to be enough of a deterrent to cause them to leave. I had initially presumed that they were looking for the medicine we keep locked in the storeroom on JC's side of the stable, but it soon dawned on me that these men were looking for my boss's main racehorse, his most valuable possession. Thankfully, she was with JC in an entirely different county. I stayed there, listening from around the corner for what felt like an hour. The men tried to move the gator before leaving, but had also given up on that, discovering I had taken the keys out of it. They eventually left, and I soon followed after, deciding that minimum wage wasn't worth potentially being injured over, if not worse. It wasn't until nearly 6 months later, after I'd found another job, that I discovered that my former boss had accumulated an unfortunately substantial amount of debt with some loan shark in Chicago, and then had been caught selling some sketchy things from the stable. It finally clicked what those men were looking for that night. They were looking for my boss and their money. Don't Be a Security Guard by Richard. To begin, I need to tell you how I ended up working the night shift of a security job at a pharmacy in the middle of nowhere. Being fresh out of high school, with no immediate plans to go right off to college, I decided that getting a job would be worthwhile. I live in a small town just off of a highway in the Midwest United States, and when I say small, I mean small. A population of no more than 700. As you can imagine, in such a small community, there aren't too many well-paying jobs, especially for someone with only a high school diploma. Luckily for me, my grandfather owned and managed a 24/7 pharmacy and was more than happy to offer me a decent salary job as a security guard. He called me up one morning and said that he had an opportunity for some cash. For reference, I'm a fairly mesomorphic guy. I stand a little over 6'3", so I wasn't at all intimidated by the thought of doing a hands-on job like that. He continued, telling me that I'd have to work the night shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I already was sort of a night owl, so I had no problem being fit into the nighttime shift. He made the job sound easy enough as well. I'd receive a little bit of training from the senior security guard, a quiet man named Don, and all I'd need to do is make rounds around the building, making sure no junkies are trying to steal their prescriptions worth, or anything like that. Eager to start, I agreed, and 3 hours later I started driving to the building. The pharmacy was in a real weird location, 13 miles down the highway from my town. There existed a little strip mall directly off the road. It consisted of my grandfather's pharmacy, a now deserted Burger King, a cheap rundown motel, and a gas station. The pharmacy was the largest of the buildings in the strip mall. It was maybe half the size of your average Walmart, and was at the far end of the lot, closest to the woods bordering the strip mall and the highway. I arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon. My grandfather and the aforementioned Don were waiting out front and greeted me when I stepped out of my car. After signing some paperwork, establishing direct deposit information, and basic training of how to perform my tasks, use the security equipment and whatnot, I was good to go for my shift. All throughout the training, Don was very quiet. He seemed distant or solemn. He was constantly looking off into the woods bordering the pharmacy. Whenever I tried to follow his gaze, I couldn't see anything. I remember the next part in great detail. Right before it started, my grandfather pulled me aside and told me this in his uncanny country accent. "We don't get many visitors out here, son. Still gotta keep your eye out, though. If you see any weird stuff happening, just ignore it. It'll go away on its own." As soon as he finished speaking, he hopped in his pickup and he drove away. Right away, I thought this was weird, but didn't bother questioning him about it, figuring he was just trying to mess with me on my first day. With my shift starting in 30 minutes, I downed a Red Bull to make sure I had enough energy to do the entire 12 hours. Come 7 o'clock, only 4 people were in the building. There was me, Dawn, who was in the security room working the cameras, Margaret, the on-duty pharmacist, and a guy whose name I forget, so we'll call him Jerry, who was Margaret's tech and assistant. I spent my time sitting in the lobby area of the pharmacy at the back of the building, where the desk where you get the prescription filled is. It gave me a good view of the entire store, as the shelves and the aisles were very short, and I was content that I wouldn't miss any criminal activity. 4 uneventful hours later, I was pacing around the inside of the building, feeling somewhere between restless and bored. I noticed that we'd had no customers come in yet, but I thought it was normal considering the location of the building and time of day. That's when my walkie-talkie crackled, and I heard Don's monotone voice from the other end. "Rick, something moving outside right by the back entrance. Looked like a teenager effing around. Check it out. Over." As soon as he said what he said, and as soon as I registered it, I immediately felt off. I'm not normally freaked out, but I couldn't fathom why a person would be behind an old strip mall in the middle of nowhere at 11:15 at night. Hoping that either Dawn imagined it or the camera glitched, I replied with a quick, "On it," and headed to the back entrance of the store. I opened the back door, feeling slightly nervous, but I didn't see anything. Not at first, anyway. A single strip of fluorescent lights from above the back door illuminated the parking lot. I looked out over it to make sure nothing was out of the ordinary. And that's when I saw it. Standing maybe 60 feet away, right at the edge of the woods, there was a man, or at least it looked like a man. It was only barely illuminated by the light, so I could make out only its silhouette. But man, was it tall, even from that distance, at least a foot taller than me. My stomach sank, and I felt really unsettled. I did, however, want to do my job and get this impossibly tall dude off the premises. I called out to it with a simple, "Hey!" Immediately after I said that, the thing took off straight into the woods, disappearing from my sight almost instantly. Trying to rationalize it, I told myself it was probably a bear or something like it, even though the way it moved and stood looked nothing like any animal I've ever seen. Being very unsettled, but wanting to get the shift over with, I headed back inside. This is where things take a turn for the worse. 45 minutes later, it was exactly midnight. I remember because I was on my smartphone when it happened. I was back in the lobby of the pharmacy when I suddenly heard loud noises all around me. I looked up and I saw easily what was the scariest thing I've seen in my life. All the windows, which lined nearly the entire store, exploded all at once, like they were all being crashed through at the same time. There was glass flying everywhere, and it felt like a war zone. Thankfully, it only lasted a few seconds. I couldn't see anything that could have caused the event through the now empty window panes. I pinged Don. He didn't answer, and once I confirmed that Margaret and the tech were okay, I ran over to his office. Once I got into the security room, what I saw chilled me. Don was lying on the ground with broken glass everywhere. His face was covered in red fluid. Apparently, when the glass exploded, it also affected all the monitors in the security room, sending massive splinters of glass into Don's face. The monitors all looked like someone threw a grenade at them. They were all totally wrecked. I called an ambulance, and they immediately took Don to the hospital. When the county police showed up, I explained to them what had happened. They would have thought I was crazy if it wasn't for the pharmacy team backing me up. They took our statements, did a quick search around the area, then left, assuring us through forced smiles that it was nothing to worry about. Obviously, me and the other pharmacy staff decided to call it a night after that. With all the windows busted, the building was entirely freezing, and definitely not presentable to customers at all. We all were unsettled by what happened. I called my grandfather, leaving him a quick message on the phone, although I'm sure it was somewhat incoherent, as I had no way of properly explaining what had happened, and I was still shaken up. I might have been able to forget about the incident entirely if it weren't for what happened next. After locking up the store, as I was leaving and getting into my car, I noticed there was a figure standing across the parking lot from me, right by the dilapidated burger joint. Since the area was lit with proper streetlights, I could make out more of the figure. I knew it was the same one from before right away because of how tall it was, but being able to see more clearly now, I saw that instead of a foot taller, they were around 9 or 10 feet, towering over the entrance to the Burger King. It was on 2 legs and looked like a person, but definitely was not. It was wearing a massive tattered trench coat with large tears and gashes in the fabric. The best way I could describe the coat was Aiden Pierce style. Cheers if you get the reference. Through the tears, I could make out its skin, a pale gray color, like heavily watered down cement, and leathery. It looked almost wet, even though it hadn't been raining. It was walking slowly, deliberately, with oddly bent joints. It was the most horrifying sight I'd ever seen in person. Instinctively, I turned the key in my car, and as soon as the engine flipped over and the charger roared to life, the thing turned to look straight at me, dead center. I swear, I made eye contact with those black, beady eyes. Seconds later, it turned and took off sprinting at lightning speed. The way it ran, it moved more like a bird, but it was impossibly powerful and fast. It disappeared from my view within moments. As soon as it was gone, I floored it home. I drove straight there without stopping, all the while paranoid that the thing was following me. And with legs that long, that would be pretty easy. I got into bed and endured a sleepless night, the entire time imagining footsteps and scratching outside my window. I never did return to the strip mall. To this day, I have no idea what the thing was. I haven't found a single matching creature from science or urban legend that fits its description. No matter how much I try to tell myself otherwise, I don't think that thing was human. I can't help but lay blame on the creature for the shattering of the windows and monitors, though I have no idea how it would have done it. But I don't care to find out. If there's anything to take from this, it would be, don't take being a security guard for an isolated place lightly. Know what you're getting yourself into. There's no telling what might happen and what you might see when you're on duty. Confession of a Security Officer by S.O. Tom. This took place back in the summer of 2007. I had just started working at a security company and was tasked with guarding an apartment building that was under construction. Workers were there until 6 p.m., and I would make sure no one came in and stole any of the equipment or supplies. These apartments were the kind that had stairs on each end that went up and down with open-ended corridors. The doors were aluminum, and that will be important later. Part of my job at the site was to patrol the 4 stories every hour and make sure all the doors were closed and locked still. At 2 a.m., I left my car, which was seconding as my office, and started to walk around. As I got to the 3rd floor of the 2nd building that night, I felt panic kick in. I didn't know why, but I just bolted out of there. I made it down the hall and to the end of the stairs and started jumping down them to get down them faster. I made it back to my car and stayed inside until sunrise, too afraid to do my job after that. When I finally did have the courage to investigate before the morning construction crews came in, I found one of the doors on the 3rd floor had been bent and swung wide open. I went to examine the door and made sure no one was still inside. When I closed it, my stomach dropped. On the inside of the door, there were 3 deep claw marks,
each one about a hand's width apart from the others. Something had torn through the door and done so much damage to it that it had to be replaced. I've never heard anything approaching, and if not for my instincts, I probably would have been just as torn up as the door itself. My Security Guard Shift by Jeffrey. I've been working as a security guard for a couple of months now, and it's pretty easy and has pretty good pay. Most of the time, honestly, you don't have much to do. I work at an apartment complex. Every so often I make the rounds, walking around to see if anyone has expired license plates or parked in a spot they're not supposed to. My work hours are from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. Something happened recently to me that has me a bit freaked out. One night, I was doing my job, walking around the parking lot, until I heard something. It was like screaming, but something was off about it. It sounded more like a beached whale than a person. The screams seemed to be coming from the nearby woods, where there was a fence to keep out anyone who wasn't supposed to be there. It took me a few minutes to gather my courage, but when I finally did, I hesitantly walked over to the fence and peeked through the woods, trying to find the source of the scream. When I came within 15 feet of the fence, I saw tree branches and bushes moving, as if something had just walked away out of sight. Something tall enough to brush past tree branches. I tried to get my flashlight on and pointing in that direction fast enough, but I only caught a brief glimpse of movement. For as long as I worked there after that, I never did hear the scream again, and I never did find out what it was that made that noise. A Security Guard's Creepy Story by Anonymous. I work as an unarmed security guard in the state of Utah, where this experience took place about a month ago. I work graveyard shifts at a 14-building, 90-acre office near a state park and mountain range. At the very far west side of the property, there is a line of trees and forest separating a neighborhood and the office park's property. And to the north, there is a bike trail with forest on both the east and west sides. At night, the parking lots are very dark, with streetlights set up about 60 feet apart. That being said, it makes this forest area extremely dark during the night. One of these nights, I was out on my patrol, shining my flashlight into the thick wooded area. As I was scanning the tree line for any trespassers or teenagers having a little fun, my most common sight, my light happened upon a set of bluish-white eyes. This place is a very hot spot for deer to roam, and at first I assumed it was a deer. I quietly got a little bit closer, trying to get a better look at it just to be sure. And what I saw was no deer, rather something crouching down. It was covered in fur and it was trying to hide, despite me obviously seeing it. It was large, a little bit bigger than a bear, but much more defined and muscular. I stayed in my security car, just staring at this bulky creature of the night, wondering to myself, what in the world kind of animal is that? I'd never seen anything like it on the property. I was both scared and curious. After 2 minutes of us glaring at each other, with this thing thinking that it was still hiding, it let out a bone-chilling growl, then turned and bounded off into the forest. I floored it back to the property, where the streetlights made me feel safe again, and for the rest of the week, I stayed away from the forests. Maybe it was just a bear, but maybe not. Either way, that creature appeared to be hunting, and it had its eyes set on me. If you're gonna be a security guard, take my advice and stay aware of your surroundings at all times. Creepy Bathroom Guy by Detailed Pig LOL.
I work in a small local grocery shop as a security guard at night. I'm the type of guy that hates having to use public bathrooms, so it's always a surprise when you go in one. Anyway, the other night officer, let's call him Bob, was sick, so it was just me on the lookout. Now, I hate my job, and I only work there for the money, because I mainly have to check the bathrooms, which I've already said I dreaded. It was night, and I was just doing some extra restocking for the guys that work there when I heard something fall in the bathroom. I thought it was toilet paper, but then I heard heavy breathing. I was instantly freaked out. I went to check, hoping to God that it was just a broken pipe or something. I pulled out my flashlight, as the bathroom lights didn't work at the time. Just a few seconds after rounding the corner and entering the door to the bathroom, I dropped my torch in shock. There was this creepy dude with a hoodie, covering most of his face. He was extremely skinny, like the pictures of starving people you've seen in a National Geographic or something, and he was wearing black jeans. When I entered, he snapped his head towards me and pulled out a large kitchen knife, but luckily I had my phone. I kept my distance from him, called my boss, who then called the cops. I pulled out a can of pepper spray and told him not to move or I was going to use it, but he didn't care. He approached me, one clumsy, melancholy step at a time, swinging that blade around, trying to cut me through for whatever reason. As the pepper spray got him in the face, the man didn't even twitch or react to it, and I found myself running until the police arrived. It felt like an eternity, but I was finally safe. They arrested the guy, and they ended up giving me a raise and the next few days off. I think they felt bad for me, as that was the worst security incident we'd had. Always check the doors. By Mr. Ace 44. In 2011, I started my new security post in the insurance district of Hartford. That area has its share of old historic buildings, and my building was no exception. It was an early 1900s mansion that was converted into offices inside. But when I say converted, I really mean just desks placed in some old rooms. One night, around 1 a.m., I grabbed my torch and started my first round. I was, of course, nervous, as I had heard your classic ghost stories from the rest of the guards. As I came to the top of the main staircase, the extremely dim lighting did nothing to help calm my nerves. Door by door, I walked down, checking to make sure they were locked. I remember thinking, this isn't so bad. I'm already almost done with this round. Everything seemed to be going well, until I got halfway down the hall. That's when the door on the right was wide open. As I walked over and glanced inside, my heart sank. I began to sweat, wondering if this was even real. Sitting center in the room was a child no more than 6 years old. He was in the dark, playing with some toys. I continued fast-paced down the hall, ignoring what I had just seen, thinking, am I going insane? The stories, they're just getting to me, right? I tried to shake it off, and I told myself my mind was just playing tricks on me, and that I need to go back and close that door. And when I do, if I look inside, there won't be anyone in there. I walked back, trying to force out a laugh to laugh it off and relieve myself. But my heart was beating harder and harder by the second. When I came to the door again and I looked inside, the boy was still in there. I was at a loss for words, barely able to breathe. Nervously, I muttered, "Hello?" The child turned around and nervously asked me with a sad face, "Have you seen my mom?" As calmly as I could, I took the child by the hand, trying to comfort him
and brought him downstairs to the security desk to call the police. I couldn't have been more relieved. It was just a lost child. How he got in the building, I don't know. I was just glad there was nothing to be afraid of. As we waited on the police, the child didn't say much and didn't seem too concerned. The cops arrived in only a few minutes. Turns out his mother worked at the office and had brought him into work that day and simply forgot about him. And it baffles my mind how a parent could go 5 hours not realizing they had abandoned their child. I continued working there for a few months and eventually got a transfer to a new post. At the end of the day, I'm happy everything turned out okay. And most of all, I'm thankful it wasn't a ghost. But you gotta admit, seeing a kid playing with toys in the middle of the dark, it would creep anyone out. Those Were Not Reflectors by Tauntaun Tom. I've worked at this job site for a bit more than a year, and I went from working days to nights. This story happened very recently. It was November 21st, 2017. Specifically, I worked security at a chemical plant located near a river. The plant is about 15 square miles. To the south runs the river, and there is a berm there at the edge of a field to the northeast. On cold mornings like today, a fog rolls in from the river and blankets everything. As you read on, you will see why I explain this. My first duty when I get in is to get in the company vehicle, then patrol the plant and surrounding area. As I was patrolling, I was on the opposite side of the feed of the berm. Shining a light across the area, I saw the reflectors of construction vehicles through the fog. Then I saw what I thought was a set of reflectors from construction vehicles that really caught my eyes. They sat atop of the berm, 2 large red circles from 3 to 5 feet apart, and they were connected to a shapeless mass. I thought it was the reflectors of a trailer, and they were parked somewhere it shouldn't be. As it was illegal to park there, I kept slowly driving towards it. As I shined the light around again, the reflectors seemed to follow me, and I simply thought it was a trick of the eyes. Or it could have just been multiple sets of reflectors on the trailer. That was pretty common. The reflectors eventually disappeared, and I chalked it up to something getting between my light and the trailer. I kept going, and after finishing my patrol, which makes a circle, I went back to the field across the berm. I had to unlock a nearby gate to allow first shift employees into their areas. The fog had cleared up enough that I could see the berm more clearly, but I couldn't see any trailer on it. So I shined my searchlight there again. There were no reflectors anymore, and there was no trailer. This frightened me a bit, because the only way someone would be able to get a trailer in or out of the area was to drive past me through the gate I had just unlocked. Whatever it was no trailer. The only thing that makes sense was that they were eyes, and if that's the case, this thing would have been big. A Wandering Spirit by Tom. I worked the 3rd shift as a security guard. I was at a location in a small town for about 2 months. There was a main building and a small guard building outside of it, in which everyone had to pass through to get to the other building. My nights consisted of watching the CCTV monitors, and on nights when no one else was around, I would patrol the outside area and the inside of the building. One night, I was looking through the camera footage as it played live when I saw what appeared to be an orb appear on camera outside the side of the guard building. I thought it was a bug or something until I realized it was just floating there. I looked out to see if there was a puddle of water reflecting a light or something like that, but my area had been in a drought for a while, and there hadn't been rain in days. I wrote it off as a camera glitch until I saw a mist-like figure appear to be standing directly across the little road that ran past the shack.
I looked out the window to the exact spot, but from my view, I saw nothing there. I grabbed my cell phone and started recording with my camera, a big no-no when working security, and filmed the figure on the screen for a bit. Suddenly, the orb disappeared, and the figure soon followed. This was not anything more than creepy, and I messaged the video to my fiancée and her sister. They thought it was nothing, just an effect of the nearby lights. They convinced me to write it off, until Saturday, October 8th of 2016. I was watching the monitors again late at night after finishing a patrol. As I watched the main buildings, the motion sensor doors opened. Then, without anything stepping out, they closed by themselves. I looked over at the camera feed. There was no wind blowing leaves, no animals, no reason the door's motion sensor would go off. Immediately, I was filled with a dreadful feeling like I was being watched. Then, the clicking started. It sounded like someone was flipping the light switches on and off. Immediately, I was filled with a dreadful feeling, like I was being watched. And then, the clicking started. It sounded like someone was flipping the light switches on and off. The lights, however, weren't turning on and off with the noise. Then I realized it was coming from the other side of the dropped ceiling. Then another started, and another. The noise multiplied until there was about 6 different clicking noises in the ceiling, all out of sync and moving around in there. I reached into my pocket and grasped my multi-tool. I convinced myself not to give in to the fear, so I did not leave or even look between the noises. As suddenly as they all started, there was just one last click, and it all went silent again. The fear and dread left, and I sat there, nervously watching the cameras again until my relief showed up. I've experienced a lot of strange things in my life, but this takes the cake. Locked Doors by Mike P. I'm a field manager for a private security company in Connecticut, and I have had my fair share of creepy experiences from the dozens of accounts I've worked at, but this one was the worst. I received a call from my branch manager one late Saturday night explaining to me that one of the officers would not be making it to his assigned shift that evening, and he needed me to go over there right away. I reluctantly agreed, but before I could finish, he interrupted abruptly, saying, "Off the record." Oh boy, I thought, what crazy backstory is there now? Things are never simple in the security industry. He explained to me that the other officer was injured the night before, and he was claiming it was due to quote-unquote paranormal activity. I laughed at him, telling him I loved the paranormal, and that I'd be more than happy to work this haunted post. Fast forward, I arrive at this large-sized factory and get the brief rundown from the guard on duty, stating that during the weekend, no one is allowed on the property due to concern over employee theft of metals in the building. I was given the keys to the security trailer, located outside the building along with a key fob to the building. The remaining guard left after that, and I sat in the trailer for a good 2 hours, until my boredom and curiosity got the better of me. Lighting a cigarette, I stepped out of the trailer, making sure to test the key behind me before fully locking it. With success, I crossed the windy parking lot to the other side of the factory. Upon entry, it brought me to a small dark room with a door on the far side. I proceeded to the second door, opening it, slowly bringing me into the main floor of the factory. It was strange though. I thought that the second door was somewhat backwards with the lock on the factory side of the door. So once again, before letting it fully shut, I tested my key to ensure that I would be able to exit. As I walked through the dimly lit factory, which smelled of rubber and oil, I made my way to a pile of crates when I heard it. I froze in my tracks,
and my heart seemed to stop for a moment. In that moment, I couldn't believe how stupid I was to walk into a factory my superiors outright said was haunted. I managed to collect my thoughts and say sternly and loudly, "Security, show yourself!" And as I expected, nothing but silence filled the room. I stood there for a moment, sweating, trying to look for any explanation for that noise. But then it came again. That was it for me. I was out of there. I kept my mind clear and retracted my steps, coming around the corner to the door I had entered from. I calmly went for my keys, and I placed the key in the lock, turned it, and nothing. The door wasn't even budging, and again I tried, but it wouldn't work. But the coughing, it was getting closer. By then, I thought, screw it, and I ran through the factory until I found a fire escape. Then I made my way out. Running across the windy parking lot felt like an eternity, but I finally made it back to the security trailer. I pulled out my keys, fitting them into the lock, and again, the door didn't budge here either. What in the world was going on? For 30 minutes, I stood in the cold, continuously trying to unlock the door until I gave up, and I kicked the door in, which I must admit was pretty fun. I'm still puzzled at what kind of force or entity is in that factory, but I sure hope I don't find out, and I most certainly won't be returning at night anytime soon.
You get used to it. From Mike V. I worked as a security guard at one of the local hospitals, and despite what I'm going to tell you, it's a pretty good place to work. Hours are plentiful, pay is good, and the nurses are downright sweet. That being said, it is still a hospital, and as such comes with its own bad things. I confess, and forgive me if I come across as a little morbid, I've been in the presence of more death in the first 6 months on the job than the previous 30 years of my life. But that's not what this is about. This story is about the hospital basement. Now, I had initially been hired to work a specific area of the hospital. I had daytime hours, but when a full-time evening shift opened up, I went for it. Gotta make that extra money. Which meant I had free range to patrol the whole property. One of the areas I had to patrol was the basement, which, contrary to what you might think, is a pretty busy part of the building. X-ray department, custodian, engineering, food prep, those are just some of the many departments that fill this basement, so it's not exactly a spooky, dark place like you might imagine. However, once 8 p.m. hits and the vast majority of employees have gone home, that basement gets very quiet, and that's when the incidents began. It was my first week as patrol officer, and so far had been rather uneventful, which I was fine with as a 5-year veteran of private security in other areas. I was kind of hoping for less action for a while. One night I was making my rounds in the basement when I began to hear footsteps. Normally this is no big deal, but it was late, so it caught my attention right away. Now I figured it was maybe a nurse who had to grab something or a visitor who took a hilariously big wrong turn, so I wandered over in that direction. As I approached the corner, I checked the wall mirror. For those of you who don't know, hospitals have ball-shaped mirrors to allow staff to check around corners, thus preventing any gurney fender benders. But I saw nothing. No people, no shadows, no movement of any kind. I rounded the corner to make sure, and it was an empty hallway. Only place they could have turned into were the elevators, and I would have heard the ding from them if someone had entered. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Probably my brain messing with me. A similar incident happened a few days later. While checking to make sure that engineering didn't leave their equipment in plain sight, again, I suddenly heard voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was for sure human voices. I went to check, out of curiosity more than anything else. But no matter where I walked, the voices always seemed distant. I didn't see anyone, and I must have walked the entire basement, but the voices always sounded distant. Then suddenly it went quiet, just like that, as if they'd left the area. How very strange, but again, I chalked it up to nothing unusual. Maybe some custodian had left a radio or podcast on or something. In my mind, it was all so easily explained and no big deal. While that could be explained easily enough, this next one was unnerving because I can't explain it to this very day. It was another day, another basement patrol, and I was walking down a large stretch of hallway, when in front of me, I noticed a set of doors close. These are the fire doors that held open magnetically. They're automatically closed upon the fire alarm going off, which incidentally had happened earlier that day, a false alarm in case you're wondering. Clearly, these two had not been pushed open after the all clear, so I walked over towards them to do the job. Then, one of them opened up. Not swung open aggressively, but just casually opened, like someone was just passing through. This caused me to stop in my tracks in shock. These doors are pretty heavy, so nobody could have just yanked it open and ducked out of sight. This door was pushed to the wall in one smooth motion, not shoved or slightly opened. Unless there was a very specifically located hurricane in that spot, those doors were not hit by a sudden draft. Not one strong enough to open a fire door all the way. Needless to say, I decided to patrol the more populated areas that night. There was also the cold spots. So many cold spots in that basement. This wasn't wind or air conditioning, these were specific moments of cold that randomly disappeared shortly afterwards. These weren't normal, they were everywhere. Not just the same spots every time. Different spots. Spots where it should have been warm, such as by the food prep kitchen or near the CT scan room. It really made no sense. A few weeks of all these things and I was just doing my best to ignore it. The job paid well, and I didn't want to abandon ship just like that. But that nearly changed one evening. Another basement patrol. Woohoo, sadly I can't skip it or say I did when I didn't because the higher-ups, they would have known. So I was back again late at night in the creepy empty basement, telling myself that my car will be paid off a lot faster with this salary. I was approaching the corner from the first incident and checked the wall mirror on instinct. And I froze. A figure stood just around the corner. Not a person, but a human-shaped black mass. It was just standing there around the corner. I was horrified at that point. My mind already on high alert, now it was on red alert. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a smudge on the mirror. No, it couldn't be that. They clean those daily. I was horrified, shaken up. I was wishing I had a fellow guard with me. But what good would that really do, honestly? I was praying to God, Odin, Ra, freaking Santa Claus if I had to, that this thing didn't decide to move towards me. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity, when that thing finally walks the opposite direction of me. Defying all sense of reason, I decided to poke my head around the corner to try to get a look at this thing. But by then, it was gone. Disappeared. I looked up at the mirror, and it was clear as well. Just me in this basement. I scrambled up the stairs at a sprint and spent the remainder of the shift around the nurse's station expecting very little sleep that night when I got home. A couple of months later, and short of the aforementioned cold spots, things had calmed down. I was working an earlier shift one day, down in the basement with a coworker doing the rounds, when I heard the sound of voices. Now, admittedly, at that time of day, it could have been anyone, but I was still quite paranoid about this basement, so my mind instantly went to the worst possible scenario. I stopped then to turn to my coworker, asking in a freaked-out sounding way if they could hear those voices. To my relief, they said yes. I calmed down a bit, then my coworker replied, "You get used to it." And I instantly stopped and stared at them. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Voices, weird noises and all that crap. Work here long enough and you get used to it, especially in this area. I assumed you saw or heard something, judging by how you looked like a deer in headlights just now." I told them about my experiences, and they said, Yeah, most of us all have had similar incidents when patrolling this area. Don't worry about it. You'll learn to shrug it off. I feel I should add quickly that this coworker is older and has been with the company for about 15 years, which to me explained how they were so casual and nonchalant about it while I was losing my crap. "Why this area?" I asked. "Never anywhere else." "Do you really have to ask?" They laughed. Then it hit me, and I almost kicked myself for not figuring it out. The shadow figure, the footsteps, the voices, the door, even the majority of the cold spots. They all happened within a close proximity of the morgue. I'd been given a tour of the facility when I started, but seeing as I was assigned a specific post when I began, I kinda just forgot about the morgue and its location. "Why wasn't I told at the start?" I asked. "Because you wouldn't have believed us. Admit it," they responded. I admit they were right. Had they mentioned it on day one, I would have laughed it off as either messing with the new guy or just silly stories, so I can't blame them. I worked at that hospital for a year before being transferred to a different site. Still a hospital, but this one doesn't have an ER, ICU, or a morgue, so I feel better. The coworkers are great, job still pays well, and I genuinely like being here. But still, I double-check those mirrors when I approach any corner, and I still jump at any sound when I'm alone at night on the job. I hope against hope that eventually I'll get used to it. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com.